Happy Saturday. Hey, what's up? We're streaming again because that's just the kind of vibe we've got going on at the moment. And I suddenly wish I had done a little bit of adjustment on the microphone, but that's all right. We haven't done that. And hello, Medicare card. I'm a little bit nervous when you're this close to a broadcasting camera, but it should be fine. As long as there's no NCIS enhance going on these glasses, which hopefully aren't too reflective because they should have a non-reflective coating. So I have been off for a walk today. Now this is very important because this is what led to me streaming right now. Because what happens is I go for a walk and I need some oral stimulation, as it were. I like to listen to things to stimulate my brain while my legs are sort of doing their thing down there as we're sort of tottering around the city and stuff. Part of that is listening to YouTube stuff. And happy days, on the way home, I came across someone who was doing a response to a channel that the topic of it sounded quite interesting. And that's the topic of the video we're going to be talking about today. So it might be a long stream. I think most of my streams are long-ish in their way. But this time we're probably going to have a fairly long stream looking at a specific video with maybe a little bit more intent than we normally do. This one ticked a lot of boxes for me in terms of being... are you kidding me? I need to find a chat solution for YouTube because this is beyond the pale. So... I have bad eyes, right? My eyes, they're no good. I can't drive, can't read beyond sort of the second, maybe third line, depending on the letter when it comes to vision tests. So that's why I need a very specific setup. This is part of the reason why you can often catch my monitor in shot because it's so close to me that the camera will pick it up when the camera is far enough away to actually pick up my face and a bit of the background and stuff. YouTube does not allow API hooks into the chat function of their website. I understand that that's because they want to reduce things like bots and scripting and stuff. However, it's something that Twitch has, that Twitch seems to be able to manage. I'd say okay, but I mean, Twitch does have issues. The problem is that it's not necessarily one or the other. It's not necessarily get an API to allow people to create software that makes things really, really accessible. So for example, in Twitch, I will actually use an app called Chatterino. I log into my Twitch through Chatterino and it's basically just like an IRC, internet relay chat. And because it's its own piece of software, I've got all sorts of scaling options in terms of the text and stuff. So I can sit back here comfortably and read my chat. And it's fantastic and I love it. And it's part of the reason why I'm so active over on Twitch is because I enjoy having an accessible option when it comes to streaming and being a creator. Obviously, it's not a big deal on YouTube if I'm doing pre-recorded content, but I don't do that at the moment. I don't have the capacity for planning that goes into scripting, recording, editing, all that sort of stuff. For whatever reason, while YouTube can be like, yes, we don't want to give out API access because of vulnerabilities and ways it can be abused, why then, in the name of all that is holy, do they not have text settings for scaling on their chat window outside of me scaling Zoom on Chrome? Because what seems to happen is no matter what I've tried to do to separate windows, open new windows, is that as soon as any instance of YouTube that I do some scaling on, so I don't want YouTube to be scaled on the video I'm streaming because things get in the way because it just breaks the page in terms of the way the page is set up. So I will scale it back for the video player. But I just tried to set up a separate window, incognito, linked to my YouTube video stream, popping out the chat again into its own own window, which should be incognito, so it shouldn't be linked to the other normal window in which I'm logged in as myself. Yet as soon as I went to move it, the main window to set it up for the stream, for the video to be shared, it immediately linked to my chat. God, I hate it here. I hate that Twitch is so good at live streams and bad at discovery, and that YouTube is bad at live streams but good at discovery. I hate it so much. All three windows are linked again. Why? Oh my God. If anyone knows a fix or has some advice on this, it would be super appreciated, because I don't know what to do now. What if this is stupid, but we'll try setting chat up correctly. So chat, that's about correct, right? That size there. Now let's copy the URL for our video. I accidentally closed Twitter instead of YouTube. Now, if I zoom on the Twitter page, it doesn't affect it. So it's literally hooking in to the other instances of Chrome through the fact that it's the same URL. That's frustrating. That's frustrating. I would have hoped that incognito mode would prevent that. We've got the same issue. That didn't fix it. All right, here's a possible solution actually. I use Edge instead for the chat. So I can close that window. We do have Edge playing our sweet tunes, so it's not doing anything else. So this might actually be the solution, is to have just a completely different browser set up as the source. Wait, no, I want my YouTube, not the streaming site we're doing. Man, my Jordan Peterson video came up first in a search for Vagrant Sam YouTube. With a mighty 41 views, come on. BoJack Horseman, 3.6k views, still the winner. Followed by my first How I Left Christianity video, which seems weird to me. Man, that's a crunchy stream. I wonder, is that just because it's not buffered yet? It's 1080p. It's fine. I'm probably just being a lot more picky than a viewer would be. I can see where it's not doing what I want it to do. Yeah, that framing's all right. It's a bit close, isn't it? Or I'm a bit close. Wait a minute. The framing I'm seeing on YouTube is different to the framing I'm seeing on OBS. What? Nani? On OBS I can see, so if I put my finger down, I can see to there. Or is this just way behind? Yeah, this is just way behind. Wow, that's a big delay. Let's get a refresh on that. Or is this just way behind? Okay, so now it's like 10 seconds behind. God damn. Anyway, pop out chat. Come on. Put chat over there. Zoom that shit in. Thank you. There we go. That's probably a lot more sustainable. Alright, don't need that anymore. Alright. Alright, we're back. Hey Davros, how's it going? Happy Saturday. Which reminds me, actually, since we're talking about Saturday. What the hell is playing over here? Oh, why is that? Oh, I muted it. Whoops. Okay, cool. Cool. All right, I think we're back sorted. I think at least we have solved the managing chat issue for a little while, at least. I have to say, it looks like at least not sharing the full link on Twitter seems to have prevented bots from coming immediately into the stream. So we'll see how it goes for the rest of the stream. I got a feeling posting it on Twitter is a mistake. Maybe I should be taking a bit more direct action against bot accounts that follow me. I seem to have gotten an influx of them recently, which is a little bit annoying. But generally, I just think, it doesn't hurt anyone. I don't care, whatever. But now I think about it, that might be the link between their following me to scrape for any thingamabobs. Yeah, so there's a video that literally, what's the time now? 9:15. Literally at 9:45, I started like the first 2 minutes of a video where someone was responding to the video that I'm about to react to. And within like a couple of minutes, I'm like, you know what? No. I don't want to listen to someone else's idea or someone else's thoughts on this. I want to do this on stream. And I've got a couple of drinks left from last night's stream, so I thought, fuck it, let's go. Let's do it. I don't know, I've got a lot of energy. I've been out walking around. I don't know where you are in terms of your life, but I'm at the point in my life where I go out for a walk in the city Saturday night around sort of 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. and it's a bit nostalgic for like when I was a young guy going out. So it sort of energized me a little bit, and so because I can't just go out and drink and smoke and dance until 2 a.m., I decided to bring that energy back to the stream and to do this. So yeah, it's probably that a lot of lives that I watch, they probably have a few more people modding potentially, so they don't get the bots as much. But so far, so good. I mean, it's only one stream where I haven't posted the link, and you know, the counterpoint might be that it's less clickable for people that are scrolling through Twitter. But so, if I was streaming for anything but my own fun and enjoyment, I wouldn't be streaming at all. Perfectly honest. Right. Hey Amanda, what's going on? Happy Saturday. Wait, what's the time? Yeah, it'd be Saturday for you by now. It'd be like 2 a.m. or something ridiculous. OBS chat. Sure. Okay, I need to do some investigation in the OBS chat module to see if there's a way to make it more readable for me. Anyway, this is boring. So, the video I discovered today, and it's, I think, 11 days old at this point, so it's not super fresh. So there's probably been plenty of other people that have dealt with it. Like I said, I ripped this off from a streamer that I saw responding to this. I didn't watch their response, so to be perfectly honest, this is completely unviewed for me. So this is fresh. This is, you know, we haven't done research and stuff. I've seen maybe the first 3 minutes of this. This is one of those guys that posts content that they think is rational, philosophically sound, based in common sense. You know, you'll get the vibe. I'll let him describe himself when he goes. We'll try and listen to it at, let's go 1.2, just so we get through it a little bit faster. But yeah. So this is, I mean, red flag, right, already. So this is Whatifalthis is the YouTube channel that we're looking at. They've got 350k subscribers, so fair game for critique, review, and mockery. And they seem to do what look like a lot of geopolitical stuff. I mean, like everyone, there's a lot of topical discussion, I guess, on the current landscape. They appear to have some opinions on why Meta means the fall of big tech, based on the microcosm of what I've heard of their channel and what type of views they have. I can make some guesses as to why they believe that. Is Germany a future superpower with an iron cross? Yeah, so interesting stuff. Now, I'm not going to try and get into too much. What the hell? Historian take on... Wait, Atlantis? But that's Australia. Okay, sorry, this is a short. This won't take long.
The public's mind for millennia. However, most
is Australia... Okay, no.
Most of the people I hear talking about it, even on reputable sources like the history...
Sorry. That audio is probably a little bit loud in comparison. Okay, hopefully none of my hentai games came up on my start screen there. Did I close my... No, I didn't. Maybe I did. One moment. Ukrainian virtue signaling. So Ukrainian virtue signaling, that's a phrase that's got a lot of baggage at the moment. So I don't know what you mean by virtue signaling. I don't know what you consider to be a virtue signal. So I would probably need you to give me an example of what you consider Ukrainian virtue signaling for me to give an opinion on something specific. Because if we don't have a shared understanding on what virtue signaling is, we're not going to actually reach a point where we are talking about the same thing, if that makes sense. Now, I'm going to just stretch a little bit of time because I did accidentally close my proper YouTube chat monitoring when I lost my music. So we'll get the music back. We are professionals, and we will get our stream back as well. Wait. Man, I've got so many tabs open, it was ridiculous. Your channel, new tab. Whatifalthis? Fucking what a name. What a fucking name. Putting the Ukrainian flag on your Twitter. So my opinion of that is fine. There's a lot of behavior that happens online where people will make symbolic gestures of solidarity with causes that are important to them. And I don't think that there's any problem with that necessarily. I understand that there can be a criticism that some people might levy if they are of the belief that people putting Ukrainian flags on their profile picture somehow feel like they are making a material impact on the outcome of the war, which I don't think is actually the case in the vast majority of the time that you see that sort of stuff. The same way when you see things like pronouns and bios, I don't think people think that that is necessarily going to prevent people from being transphobic, but what it does is it tries to help to normalize not assuming pronouns. So the Ukrainian flag, when people put that on that, it's a symbol to the world of, you know, what they support and what their values are. Broadly speaking, the idea of virtue signaling, I think generally most of the times when I hear that phrase, it's because someone is trying to weaponize the idea of sharing your values as being a negative thing, because it somehow is mutually exclusive of the idea of actually doing material praxis in the world, so actually taking action on the things that you believe, which I don't think is generally the case for most people. I think the closest, most charitable interpretation of people that might mock people for virtue signaling is that there probably is things that are important to all of us that we believe that we don't take action on. And that's mostly to do with the fact that we don't have infinite capacity to do everything that matters to us. So what's an example for myself, I guess? So here's a good example for me. I am not particularly effective when it comes to directly engaging with the struggle for Indigenous people in Australia to find recognition and, you know, their place in Australia as citizens that, you know, have the trauma of the past being recognized by the current day people in government. I've got no misconceptions about the fact that I can say that I support them and say that it's important to me that the decisions that are made by the leaders in my country support Indigenous people, but there's very little I actually do, and that's my capacity and that's my ability to do that sort of stuff. Because I'm not in the community because I'm not Indigenous myself. B, I'm not well educated enough on their struggles directly to feel like I should be able to speak up for them. And, you know, lots of other smaller, I guess, tangential issues like that. But I still think there's value in me vocally supporting them, which might be dismissed as virtue signaling by some people. And I think that virtue signaling criticisms in those contexts are not genuine concerns. They're more trying to push back against ideas that that person doesn't believe in. So they might be very clear on calling out virtue signaling for things that they disagree with, but they might not be as consistent with things they do agree with. And so that's where I sort of stand on that. The Ukrainian flag and showing solidarity as a society, and particularly as an international society, to the extent that it is international, I think that's noble and fine, and you know I support that. I haven't done it myself because again I recognize that the material benefits aren't necessarily there, but there are definitely benefits to recognizing the things that we value, even if they're not things that we can directly change. Coach Red Pill sounds familiar. I've got a feeling I might have come across some of his videos, and you know, in my time online where people talk about such things. So, and Amanda, people from Ukraine are on Twitter. They see others use their flag as a way of supporting them. Yeah, see, that's exactly what I mean. And this is the thing, like I'll criticize people that are calling out virtue signaling, and I feel like I do that from a position of strength, in that I recognize that when they say it's virtue signaling, what they're saying is that, oh, you're not actually doing anything. But the counter to that is sometimes that's all people can do, and the show of emotional support can actually have value as well. And so I think it's kind of silly. Anyway, I think we have everything set up. So, God, we're looking at this Take on Atlantis stuff, and we were changing the volumes because our volume was playing around. Well, not playing around, it just wasn't right. All right, where's our music? Music is there. Probably needs to be there. That's actually quite soft now, isn't it? All right. I know. Okay, here we go. We got the problem. It's all right. I figured it out. My actual YouTube is really low.
Atlantis has captivated the public's mind for millennia. However, most of the people I hear talking about it, even on reputable sources like the History Channel, are pseudoscientists peddling deliberate falsehoods. First of all, it's impossible from a geological standpoint that Atlantis existed. Secondly, in my opinion, Atlantis was created as an agenda on Plato's part as a parable. In the ancient world, myths were meant to demonstrate moral truths rather than be strictly true. Plato was an arch-conservative, and the story of Atlantis is basically that how their empire rose when they followed the gods, and then they became arrogant and were defeated by the Athenians who followed Plato's values, and then Atlantis was destroyed by the gods. It would be like if a modern conservative made up a story.
This is not about Australia.
Republicania. You can draw some parallels where there was a city with a lot of similarities in Turkey that was destroyed by flooding, but this is probably similar to how Lord of the Rings...
Right, I got clickbaited. Where's the fucking thumbs down? Fuck you. The only reason I clicked on it is because you showed Australia and said Atlantis. Come on. Anyway. It's not why we're here. We're here for... Wait, where are we? Wait. Wait, here we go.
There'd be so many...
Shut up. I'll save the link. I did accidentally hide your message. I didn't mean to do that because I just have a reflex when I see like a broken link that it'd say bot. But I'll have a... Hang on. Let me put that in a notepad. Wait, we don't have notepad anymore. Showing my age. But no, yeah. This I'm amped up for this one at the moment. I'm sure this will cover some of the things that it seems like you've got an interest in. Demons. Nouveau demons suck.
Last summer, the United States had one of the very few rebellions in its history. 6 blocks of downtown Seattle formed an anarchist state that declared independence from the United States of America. They fought with the authorities alongside demanding the abolition of the police in general. Roving bands of protesters looted the city. Their utopian state literally collapsed into a dictatorship run by a SoundCloud rapper in the first couple hours, and they ran out of food within the first day. At the same time, erecting literal shrines to George Floyd. Shockingly, the reason it survived so long was that they were supported by the mayor of Seattle, who refused to evict the rebels. Left-wing media, in turn, reported this case in...
So, already what we're going to see in this channel is that they're actually going to do a lot of the things that they're going to accuse the left-wing media of doing. And that is, they're going to accuse the left-wing media of supporting, or they're going to frame the way that the left-wing media report on particular things in particular ways. So, for example, suggesting that the mayor supported this particular, already anarchist state, which was a few blocks where people were pushing against police authority and making demands, I guess, of the city. That's already framing that is not neutral. That's already framing that is leading us to a presupposed conclusion that there's a broad support in the political parties of these left-wing anarchists, which patently is ridiculous when you look into what political parties actually do and how they actually operate. There's no such thing as a left-wing party, in my opinion. There is at best central parties and right-wing parties. America, even more so, the Democrats would be right-wing in reference to probably, particularly places like Europe and even Australia to a certain extent. The Democrats probably have more in common with our right-wing Conservative Party than they do with our left-wing party that actually does work with the Greens Party and stuff. So that's mostly what we're going to be looking for, is the way that they're framing everything. But I need to not pause that often because it's a long video.
A block party or peaceful protests. Some of my friends in Canada and Europe say it was barely even reported over there. This was complemented by riots across the country. I'm sure lots of people have similar stories, but my friends in Philadelphia saw people use...
It's also interesting that he's got a criticism that an American news story wasn't reported in Europe and Canada, as if like everything in the world revolves around America. Like that's a very it's a very arrogant take. I know America exports a lot of their politics and a lot of their culture, but we certainly don't get the same level of news on America that Americans are going to get. It seems like a silly thing to bring up.
Dynamite that blow up ATMs, widespread looting, fires, and breaking cars.
We are talking about a discrete event that happened. And again, our friend here, What If Alt History, is showing us a graph, top right corner, 2000 to 2020, showing civil unrest in the United States of America. So this doesn't really have to do with the event he's talking about, and he's flashed this on the screen. This is a way that data is misleading. So again,
wealthy downtown area.
Not setting himself up.
One of my friends from Richmond, Virginia, told me that their police station was burned down, as well as literal buses in the street. These riots and rebellions, which were largely supported and never denounced by the mainstream left-wing media, were based around the murder of a single black man in Minnesota.
Riots and the burning down of buildings has been denounced everywhere. I'm not sure you could find a single media outlet that would be considered mainstream media by the majority of people who didn't negatively report on burning down neighborhoods. I think the best you'll find is that people might complain that a particular organization didn't condemn them strongly enough, but yeah.
What provoked an otherwise rational society to behave in this manner? That's the question of this video. Hi, I'm Rudyard, the guy behind Whatifalthis, and as a...
Why is his... Why is it like this? Why is it not like this? Like, you're posting these to YouTube. I know this sounds silly, but why? Why?
YouTuber, I've honestly always loved my fan base, and I'm really thankful for you guys. But I always felt like my community had more potential that hadn't been reached. That there'd be so many different ways that we could build a rich community and have beautiful experiences. This is a problem one of my best friends, housemate, and massive fan of Whatifalthis, Matthew DeMarc Antonio, is working on. He's the CEO of Pearl, a tech company built around content creators like me, alongside fans like you. I'm launching a Pearl community in a week, and we're trying to get a wait list of 1,000, so I want you to click the link in the description and join the Pearl community. Pearl combines a bunch of different services.
Another social media? Oh my god. How many social media sites are we going to end up having? See, the reason social media websites work is because they're condensed, they're contained, they're focused. Everyone's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, or YouTube. Like, I know that's not literally true, but it's fundamentally, you can find everybody in one of those places. But fuck, what's the Trump one? Truth, right? Oh, God damn. So you got Truth now, you got BitChute, you got Parler, you got Gab. Fuck me. I suppose there's never too much free speech, right?
It's a free-to-use app where you could, for example, commission me to make a map or have a half-an-hour conversation with you. There's also community chat with channels for various topics that works like Discord, and we're launching audio rooms in the future as well. There's also behind-the-paywall content as well. Click the link in the description and join the waitlist today.
It's a Patreon.
See you all on Pearl.
All right, nah. I'm curious. Sorry, if you wanted a focus stream, you should have gone to watch a video essayist. Patreon. Pearl. God, I hate any... Nah, I'm out. You want my information? Fuck off. Maybe if I make it into a project.
This video is meant to be a breakdown of the social justice movement, pulling on my knowledge of history, philosophy, religion, and just thinking rationally.
I hate anyone who prefaces their opinion with them claiming authority because of the way they've studied history, philosophy, and religion. It was history, right?
Movement, pulling on my... This video is meant to be a breakdown of the social justice movement, pulling on my knowledge of history, philosophy, religion, and just thinking rationally.
And thinking rationally. Facts over feelings.
How did the movement start? What's its underlying psychology, rationale, and where I think it's going? You're going to start to see my political opinions, and even though I'm center-right, I wanted this video to be rooted in common sense and values that all reasonable people from different cultures or political beliefs could agree with.
So already he's established to us that if we disagree with him, then we're disagreeing with a rational, sensible mindset for understanding the things that he's about to talk about. Yeah. Not exactly what you'd do if you're actually coming to a project as a blank slate, if you're approaching it sort of tabula rasa and trying to build an understanding from no preconceptions and from just a blank slate. And this is what sort of frustrates me, is that, like, you will find creators online who will look to explore a topic and they will claim that they are doing this rationally and they've got no biases. So all of this is meant to set us up to think, okay, cool, we're going to get an understanding of social justice that lacks bias. That is bullshit. And not only is it bullshit, it is very specifically bullshit in that everyone, if you ask them, do you have any biases, they would answer, generally, if they're going to be honest. Like, let's assume a good-intentioned agent. If I ask this person, if I was talking to them, do you have any personal biases? They're going to say yes. Now, I believe if I was to be doing a video or a content or streaming or anything like that, that the best way to approach a topic in order to make sure my audience is informed about how to distill my opinions is to be upfront about my biases. My biases are that I exist on the left, that I believe that progressive change is broadly a positive force that improves the lives of other people. I think that diversity brings things like innovation and success to society. And despite the fact that it introduces friction in that, yes, when you've got diverse communities, you generally have more clashes because of those differences. Ultimately, we end up with a better end product and a better society. That's my bias, right? So when I look at social justice, understand that my bias is I think it is good to work towards things that create more social justice. And that is when we look at justice as being a way of ensuring that everyone has access to the same opportunities. Let's see how he goes with this.
To get started, I want to set up several definitions and tell you where I'm coming from. The first of which is that social justice is a very difficult movement to define, as we'll see, because it goes across many different parts of the life.
I think I did a reasonable definition just there, so you know me.
In many different fields, but I define social justice as a group whose identity is primarily built around fighting oppressive structures.
Okay, already wrong. And it's interesting that what he said is not what he actually put on his little slide here. I actually need to change the zoom on the window because it's covering too much of the screen with the stuff. So he said if your identity is primarily built around, but he hasn't put that in his written definition. And this is where we get into some of the stuff that I start to have a big a lot of trouble with, where people start to think that having a agenda to achieve some form of social justice, depending on whether it's about cultural identity, religious identity, sexual identity, gender identity, that if you're passionate about it, that it is your identity as a person, which is not necessarily the case. And I think that's probably mostly a misnomer from the fact that often you'll see accounts or people that have built their accounts and their online presence around advocating for something in particular doesn't mean it's their entire identity. There are lots of people who I see on my social media feed, and the predominant content they're posting is to do with whatever they're passionate about when it comes to their agenda in terms of making the world a better place. But I don't get caught up thinking, well, your identity is climate change activism. That's who you are. You've made that your identity because you're somehow not a genuine person, and you're sort of LARPing in this thing that you want to try and care about because you've got nothing else going on in your life. And that is just ridiculous. It is a misnomer to sort of dehumanize people as a means to dismiss their opinion, because somehow your opinion can't be valid if it's your identity as a whole.
And as an example of that, not all environmentalists are part of the social justice movement. Not all socialists are part of the social justice movement. But the social justice movement has many people who are part of the environmentalist and socialist movement. So
here's another clue as well. They have chosen to capitalize social justice, which suggests that they're treating it like a proper noun. It's the same way that you'll get like Christians that will capitalize God because the concept is important, and it sort of shows a reverence to the idea of God beyond it just being an idea and actually being a significant thing. See, to me, when I see someone capitalize it like that, particularly when they're critiquing it, that's already a red flag that they're putting onto the idea of social justice all these other things that sort of burden it down for them personally, and it's kind of their personal hang-ups with people that are actually being activists with their lives. And this is kind of where I stopped and go, okay, hey, I actually need to look at this video. So this is definitely all new territory for me.
I'd say most environmentalists in Western countries are allied with the social justice movement. As another example, I would say President Biden and center-left groups like the New York Times aren't explicitly social justice. They're more center-left. But oftentimes they have lots of social justice people in their alliances, and so end up becoming beholden to them. At the same time, I don't stand...
It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous to think that anyone is beholden to the left. The left has such little political power. The idea that change is occurring because of the left as opposed to a societal shift in values that is the center moving to the left is just coping so fucking hard with the fact that your conservative values are no longer the main values that are guiding your country.
And against anyone who's trying to do genuine good and deal with
genuine good.
I would say the movement to get gay rights or the civil rights movement are both good, but I think these people come from a very different tradition than modern social justice.
So justify it, right? So I want to see in this video how he actually points out specifically, and I'm sure he will, but how he's going to point out to a social justice activity that is somehow different from the civil rights movement or the gay rights movement and all that sort of stuff. Because he has pointed to specific things and said these are good, but they're not social justice with capital S, capital J. But yeah, this is a constant theme on my channel, is I really want to find out what people mean when they talk about wokeism, when they talk about social justice, when they talk about the left goes too far. I hear it all the time. The stream last night, we looked at Atheists for Reason or whatever the fuck it is. The group that David Silverman's a part of. The president's name is something Sneedy, and it turns out that it's just a right-wing conservative lobby group LARPing as atheists and trying to carve out a group of atheists and to basically grift them into going along with the fundamental Christian Republican voting bloc and maintain conservative power. And again, all of the content I saw yesterday looking through that organization, at no point did I see what wokeness was, with the exception of one thing, where a person who was at an atheist conference in 2010, 2011, Rebecca Watson, her name is Skepchick. She's on YouTube. I think she's a great watch. She made a letter saying, hey, I didn't appreciate someone asking me to their room at 4 a.m. in the morning after we'd all been drinking. That's not appropriate, and, you know, fine. And then Richard Dawkins liking that to, you know, the woes of genital mutilation, and, you know, how dare this white woman have boundaries that she wants to set and expectations she wants of, you know, not being approached at 4 a.m. in the morning by strangers, and how unreasonable that was because other people have things happening worse in their life. And Richard Dawkins, with his platform and, you know, his reach, mocking a woman in the atheist movement in the early New Atheist days, that apparently was wokeness to them. That woman standing up for herself. So again, that to me ridiculous, and sort of mocks the entire idea of standing up for skepticism and rationality. And again, for this gentleman who has said he is steeped in a education of history, religion, and politics, I'll be interested to see his very specific, well documented and well thought out
Martin Luther
arguments.
King, for example, drew from the American tradition of us all being equal before the law and God. But these
Americans, I think it's really funny that any of you, and I know not all Americans think this, but any American who thinks that the American tradition is everyone being treated equal, particularly when on their screen they're showing a picture of the civil rights movement in the 1960s and Martin Luther King Jr. and all the work that had to be done to even start moving into a more equal society, is just like what are you thinking to like know this happened and to say that the American tradition is that all people are created equal? I know it says it somewhere in a document. I know you've got like some, is it in the Declaration of Independence? I don't know. American history is not mine, but all men are created equal in front of God, blah, 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 blah. The problem is when that document, that tradition had a very specific definition of all men, because it wasn't all people. Anyway.
Modern social justice people come from a Marxist tradition that tries to tear down the successful rather than pull up the...
Martin Luther King Jr. was inspired by some Marxist ideas, funnily enough.
Downtrodden. At the same time, I don't think the right is blameless, and the right has done bad stuff in the last 2 years, but an ill done on the right doesn't justify an ill on the left.
Also, for those of you who are going to say this is a biased rant with no research...
Already it's biased, because how much of this video was spent on the left's ill, and then we just have one picture of the Jan 6 riots.
I've actually done a tremendous amount of study from all perspectives to get to this video essay. I've read anti-social justice pundits, as well as taking a course in gender studies, reading foundational texts of social justice, while also reading the philosophic and historical context, like I always do with these videos. I've spent years in social justice-dominated educational institutions.
Created equal under God, but who are they talking about? Because we know from whatever has happened throughout history that the reality hasn't been that the American tradition has been to treat all people created equal under God. So my problem with that is not the phrase that all people are created equal under God. My issue, and is it created equal, all people created equal? What's the actual wording? I've got a feeling it's all people. Again, in my Australian ignorance, I apologize. I need to actually look that up. All men are created equal, that they are... Right, I can zoom. We have these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal if they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Yeah, so this here, how has this been understood throughout history? And I'm not picking on America, because everyone, everyone has their way of... Everyone has some sort of version of this in the West. We're all British cousins, effectively. But the fact is that these words are innocuous, right, by themselves. Take away the separation of church and state, right, because that's not what we're talking about here. The fact that this was not inclusive of all people, this was not inclusive of all ways of expression of your identity. So, and again, we can point to in the video the examples of that with the civil rights and the gay rights movement. So we know for a fact that American tradition did not treat that phrase as the standard for how to treat everyone that is an American citizen. It was for a particular group of American citizens, that is people that fit into the cultural narrative of what it means to be a upstanding man in America. That's my problem with that, is the way it's been interpreted throughout history, regardless of whether or not we can pick that apart in the words now, isolated from how they're actually implemented in the past. I think it's hard to get away from that.
And so I know their arguments inside out.
All right, I'm going to fill up. I'll keep this playing because I've got wireless headphones because I'm fancy.
Gotten, so I'm going to give some examples. For one, the Biden administration has referred to women as birthing people because saying mothers might be transphobic. The Canadian government passed a bill making it illegal not to use someone's preferred pronouns. The Guardian posts articles saying hating men is okay. CNN supports reparations for slavery, something most black people don't support. For the next round of Oscars, they have quotas on how many people from oppressed groups you have to have on the staff of your movie in order to be eligible. These are all moderate left-wing places as well. I could go on and on with stories like this. And just my personal...
Holy shit. Okay, that was a lot there. So I think it's pretty clear that there's a story that's being told by this creator, and it's a very specific story that they want to tell. And I'm not going to criticize people for telling their story. What I'm going to criticize is the fact that they are presenting this as the common sense, middle of the road, rational way of looking at the world, and any other way of looking at these things is irrational. So, Bill C-16. I'm shocked in 2022 that someone would bring up Bill C-16 as a problematic bill. This is what put Jordan Peterson into the pipeline, so to speak, where he had his famous meltdown that throw me in jail, I don't care, I will not call a woman a man or a man a woman, or whatever his specific verbiage was. So essentially all it was adding gender identity to existing hate speech laws. So there's already hate speech, and it just added additional considerations to what included hate speech, which I think if you're going to protect gender, then gender identity, you need to protect that as well. They're the same thing in many ways.
The government passed a bill making it illegal not to use someone's preferred pronouns. The Guardian posts articles saying hating men is okay. CNN supports God,
I wish we had time to go through all these. Feminists don't hate men, but it wouldn't matter if we did. Well, that seems fair enough. That's not saying it's okay to, but oh my God.
Guardian posts articles saying hating men.
This is a gish gallop. Like I get that could be construed as a very uncharitable way of looking at how he's presenting his evidence. But it never fails me that when I look these things up, they never say what they think they're saying. For starters, this looks like it's tagged as opinion. So I mean, it's not even evidence. This is someone's opinion.
And is okay. CNN supports reparations for slavery, something most black people don't support.
Right, so the question, do you think the government should or should not make cash payments to the following groups of people? That is not saying against reparations, because cash payments is a very specific question in terms of ways that reparations can be made. And again, it's a complex topic, and to say that, well, no, black people don't want reparations. Look at this study when a question that asked if they should get cash payments as a form of reparations settles the question. Ridiculous.
For the next round of Oscars, they have quotas on how many people from oppressed groups you have to have on the staff of your movie in order to be eligible. These are all...
Why? Why do they have those in there? Part of the reason they have those as quotas in this, and I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I think when you're looking at critiquing something that you disagree with, part of what you need to do in that critique is to understand what it's trying to achieve. What it's trying to achieve is that there is a long history of awards, Oscars, going to films without consideration for how those films actually perform or are considered in places outside of a white-dominated culture space. And there are lots of movies that don't exist solely within a white culture space. The fact that we saw like Parasite, how many years ago was that now? Fuck, time is just escaping me at the moment. But Parasite from Korea is a good example of how we're starting to see that hegemony erode over time, because again, we're increasing our not access, but people have got better access, I guess, as individuals to things that are more diverse than they normally would. Like, I remember that when it's like, oh shit, I need to travel half an hour to the next town over to watch Batman, because that's the cinema it's going to and stuff. Whereas now I can literally download and stream, Korean, Japanese, Italian, like all sorts of films from around the world, and actually be immersed in things that are not just built within the cultural sort of zeitgeist of Western culture. Sorry, culture being used a lot there. But like, we know Hollywood, America exports pretty strongly to, places like the UK and Australia and New Zealand and Canada. The English-speaking world particularly gets a lot of American culture exported to it because so much of it's created there. It's not to say we don't have our own things, but, that is very easy to get caught up in and to, start having an internal bias that might not be intentional, it might not be explicitly racist to have that bias, and to sort of make sure that diversity is included. It's a good way to start to tackle that.
Moderate left-wing places as well. I could go on and on with stories like this. And just
What's wrong with this picture? What is wrong with this picture?
My personal life, for example, how there were protests in the college I went to when the college Republican club tweeted out "Vote for Trump," or my high school replaced a yearly Study a Foreign Country week with Social Justice Week. Alternatively, the only real demographic that
that flash of Me Too
week with Social Justice Week. Alternatively, the only real demographic that really twists my words unfairly and tries to destroy
a small sample of leftist Reddit posts about why I'm evil. Shit, this guy's. How did I never come across him before?
By me, especially on Reddit, is
and dude, dark mode. Seriously.
My friends in the finance, entertainment, and tech industries say a significant minority, if not a majority, of firms just aren't hiring white men anymore.
Bullshit.
Entirely for diversity hiring. I hate it when people say social justice is just a marginal movement, that it's confined to campuses and ivory tower fools, or that it's not that radical. Both of these are normally what moderate left-wingers say to apologize for it in the same way moderate right-wingers do for extreme nationalists or normal people do for their delinquent cousins. The truth is that this is an ideology that controls much of the entertainment, media, and education worlds on almost every level.
School to prison. Okay, so yeah, make America great again. Yeah, I'm down with that. Hiring discrimination, if it exists, particularly hiring discrimination, it's hard to talk about that because I guess that's very region dependent. Like, I guess I can't talk about what happens in America. I know it's not happening in Australia. That's for fucking sure. Discriminatory leading, I don't even know what that means. Police murdering people of color, yeah, that's pretty white supremacist. Racial profiling, we know that happens. Paternalism, if they're talking about patriarchy, we know that happens. Mass incarceration, we know that happens. Police brutality, kind of feels like a 2 for here. And even racial profiling, I mean, that's pretty big policing, isn't it? Eurocentric curriculum, true. We got that. Like, I can talk about that in terms of, like, we learn about white Australia, we don't learn about Indigenous Australia. America is great because they rebelled against the British monarchy. I mean, fine, sure. I got no horse in that fight, so to speak. Not believing experiences of people of color. Is this... Okay, so this is probably done by someone who thinks this is a informative graph, and he's showing this as, like, look at this ridiculous denial of white privilege. How dare that be there? Expecting people of color to teach white people. This is a complicated subject because I feel like there's a strong theme of like, don't talk for people whose experiences you haven't had. But then if people of, if people that are allies don't talk in white spaces about people of color, it's harder for people of color to penetrate those spaces and to make their, lessons. Well, I mean, this is about expecting people of color to teach. I guess what that probably is more focused around is like the expectation. Like, we should be grateful when we, can receive, be taught by people of color about their experiences, but to expect them to do it, I can see how that's a lot of social baggage. But what about me? Yeah, that's the that's kind of the hiring discrimination, isn't it? Oh, excuse me. Blaming the victim, believing we are post-racial, housing discrimination for sure, fearing people. Yeah, see, nothing's wrong with that.
And a larger and larger share of the political and corporate worlds. How did we get here, though? Social justice is a very organic philosophy in that, unlike Marxism or Christianity, there was no one prophet who set the philosophy out, but instead it kind of just formed from a bunch of different roots and bumped around universities in the 1990s until it became really public after the 2008 financial crash, quickly amassing influence over all of society. People often roast Jordan Peterson for saying social justice formed as cultural postmodern Marxism, but that's historically accurate. If you wanted to find the place where the ball started rolling that eventually resulted in social justice, it would be with the disenchantment with traditional Marxism that came during and after World War II. Once leftists realized that Marxism had failed on every single level imaginable, by not reaching a utopia, being poorer than capitalism, killing tens of millions of people, and not even attracting the working classes, leftists had to find—
There's no bias at all. No fucking bias.
—a new story in order to retain their core beliefs. You know those weird cults that build their entire worldview around the world ending?
China is obviously famously communist, because their party's called the Communist Party, right?
Normally what happens when the world doesn't end is that those cults fracture and make some minor edits to why their overall story wasn't working. Why the world would actually end 10 years later, or why the world—
Social justice is a religion.
—when conditions weren't met. That's what happens here as well with communism. The Frankfurt School believed that the bourgeoisie constructed culture, and so the revolution could only take place once the previous culture had been deconstructed enough that the working classes realized that it was inside their true interests to be communists. The emphasis switched from the working classes to women and ethnic minorities, as those groups rose to greater social predominance. Likewise, another branch of former—
God, he flashes stuff up so quickly.
—as those groups rose to greater social—
I feel like this is out of context because I'm not entirely sure what they're trying to say here. I can't get distracted by every—
Likewise, another branch of former communists in France founded the postmodern movement, which some of my really smart friends tell me actually has deep philosophic merit, but from my perspective largely translates to everything's a social construct for power and there should be no broader stories. Postmodernism doesn't believe in any broader theories of the world, but the logic that developed was something like, if broader stories are wrong, we can create a story which is about opposing other people's—
So he's talking about communists and the link between Marxism and social justice today, and yet he's not talked about the contention between the proletariat and the bourgeois. And that, I feel like that's the key to actually linking Marxism and social justice. The idea that under Marx, it recognizes that it is the working class relationship to the capital owner that actually causes the levels of oppression that different groups feel. So like a lot of the struggle that women face is the fact that their role as their position against, say, the bourgeois in terms of capital owners is that they've got very little capital by comparison, because historically women don't own capital, women operate in the household. And then even when they start to get into the workforce, they get relegated to jobs that would pay less, because men would evacuate those jobs and move to higher paying jobs. It's why we see many female nurses, not necessarily today, but historically, nursing is sort of a feminine job and being a doctor is a male job. There was more money there, so the men went to those jobs and the women occupied the nursing jobs. As well as all these other things that, they needed to give up flexibility. They needed to attain flexibility in exchange for additional pay, because they were considered to be or expected to be the homemakers. So even when they are still working and there's a family at home, they're the ones that would put their careers on pause. So like that's an example of the intersectionality of the struggles of feminism and how it relates to the owner of capital and the worker for capital. And that's how Marxism sort of intersects with social justice. And you see the same thing when it comes to things like the role of particularly white people that have occupied a nation. So in America, the white people coming over and occupying the nation that was already incumbent to the Native Americans. And in Australia, the British coming here and occupying Australia when it was already incumbent to the indigenous peoples around Australia. And the white people are the ones that established the capital, and they carved out capital in those countries. And it is then the lack of access to that capital in this new structure that has created the levels of repression that we see in those groups. That's the link that Marxism has to social justice. And I feel like he hasn't actually explained that. He hasn't actually talked about Marxism. He's talked about communism. And when he's talked about communism, I can tell by the fact that he's just looked at communist regimes that he's not talking about Marxism. He's talking about, at best, Marxist-Leninism, which is not really an honest way to look at it, I guess. Why are leftists all of a sudden supporting Ukraine? I won't speak for everyone. I will speak broadly on what I think. The reason is that broadly people on the left are supporting Ukraine, and it's because people on the left are more likely to believe that people have a right to live where they want to live. And that includes groups that are indigenous to particular places and groups that have become naturalized into places through being there for many generations. So when they see a force like Russia trying to invade a place and to occupy that place and to hurt the people that were already there, they see that as an imperialist move, as basically the same thing that the British were doing, a few hundred years ago. We think that's bad. And so that's why people are supporting Ukraine. They're not supporting Ukraine because everything Ukraine does is moral or ethical. They're not supporting Ukraine because Ukraine has the exact same ideology as people on the left. They're supporting Ukraine because in a discrete event that is occurring at the moment, and that is Russia attacking a sovereign nation, that they believe that there is no natural right for a nation to simply attack another nation because they believe that that land should belong to them because of some previous glorious Russian nation. I'm glad the tweet told you about it, Spooky.
Oppressive stories which hold down oppressed groups. This sort of view became more popular in academia in the 1990s as the baby boomers, who were significantly more left-wing than their parents, took over academia. As the baby...
I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, who is more left-wing? Okay, maybe baby boomers are more left-wing than the silent generation, but holy shit, that's a small bar. Okay, give me a marked axis, for the love of fucking God. Are these birth years? But they can't be birth years because he's talking about boomers. Boomers would be in the fucking, 60s, 70s?
Boomers gained power. Academic departments went from being around 3/4 left-wing to 90%.
Oh, okay, so that's academic. Okay, this is probably academic departments. I love that. I am always saying that a centrist is just a conservative who doesn't want to admit it. And I know this graph is probably dog shit, but fuck me, don't they look like they're following the same trajectory as if they're the same group of people?
Gained power. Academic departments went from being around 3/4 left-wing to 19/20, which resulted in an echo chamber in which pandering to one's own faction was the way to get ahead.
I've been at university. I don't know about everyone. Like, I know university is not the pathway that everyone takes. But I've been to university many times. And to think that universities are an echo chamber is mind-boggling to me. And again, maybe America does things a little bit differently. But when I go to university, when I go into classes, we have what's called lectures, bog standard. There are questions, so you can ask questions to get clarifying statements or to potentially challenge the professor. But we also have what's called tutorials in Australia. And tutorials are generally smaller groups. And you'll have maybe 2 hours of tutorials to 1 hour of lectures a week. And that's when you actually have a lot more robust discussions and stuff, and you can actually challenge and push back on things. And on top of that, you can actually, I never got given the answer when I was at university. I got told the question, and I always got marked based not on what my answer was, but how well I argued my answer. How well I researched it, how well I was able to articulate it in relation to the recognized study that existed, the body of work that had already been vetted and had already been, put through the what's it called? I'm losing my credibility. Peer reviewed. That's always been what I've done in university. And I first went to university in 2001. And I was last at university in 2017, so I'm not that far out of touch with how the process works. I remember in 2002, sorry, was the first year I went to university. And I remember that one of the first classes we were talking about women's studies, because holy shit, it turns out we didn't talk about that a lot in high school. So at university, I think they kind of felt pressure to go, hey, by the way, we need to sort of acknowledge that there's this whole gender outside of, the assumed normative male gender when you've been learning in high school that we're just going to quickly talk about. And, we're going to just quickly talk about consent and make sure that everyone understands that no means no and stuff like that, because it turns out that that's kind of an issue at universities. And to say that that is an echo chamber is just, it is mind-boggling. It is particularly considering that, again, we are, a month or two away from George. This is what happens when I have a few drinks. We are, a month or two away from Peterson, quitting university, pre-cancelling himself. So if anything, the reason that universities would become a echo chamber is because conservative people are electing to leave academia because they don't have substantial arguments. There's a reason why education correlates with progressiveness, and it sounds horrible, I know, because it's like, well, you're calling me an idiot. No. I'm not calling you an idiot. I'm saying that the access to information has an effect on your ability to be more empathetic towards people that live outside your experience. And the more empathy you have for people outside of your experience, outside of your, let's call it tribe, the people that look like you, that live around you, that you have a close understanding of what their day-to-day life is, the more you know and pierce through that wall around you, the more you start to empathize with people and start to think, hey, maybe it's important that they have a good life as well. Whereas you get these conservative groups that start to really focus on, hey, university, maybe that's not the answer. Hey, don't go to university. They're just going to teach you to be more progressive. And they just coalesce and they just coagulate into literally an echo chamber because they never get that experience of going to a organization or a university. That universities have a massive pull, right? Like when you go to university, you'll go to a central area that pulls from sometimes hundreds of kilometers away, hundreds of miles if you're in America, right? So the different types of people you meet are nothing like what you see in high school, which is pulling from, maybe a part of your city or a part of your town. You know what? If you think people are getting yelled out of their classes for having a different opinion, then I don't know what to tell you, because it's certainly not the case. What people do get yelled out for and get basically kicked out of the class for will be for making normative statements about gender, identity, sexuality, for making claims that essentially boil down to, hey, being gay is wrong, because the Bible says so, right? That's what people get yelled at for. They don't get yelled at for saying, well, why, how, what, They get yelled at for making claims that they aren't actually able to substantiate because they misrepresent the basis of the discussion. And if you think it's wrong to be gay and you want to go into a university class and you want to advocate that being gay is wrong, then that's not academic. That is just you being a bigot. Because if you think it's wrong to be gay, you can just not be gay. You don't actually need to go into university and to advocate that people who are gay should feel bad about it. That's why you get kicked out. Not because you don't want to be gay yourself, but because you don't want other students to be gay as well. And that's not academic discussion, and that's not actually something that has any value in particularly freshman classes. Like if you're in your first year at university and you think you're at the point where you can challenge sexual identities like that, then you've got a lot more work to put in before you can start to push back against that body of work. Jordan Peterson gets yelled at because he goes in as a guest speaker to spread misinformation. The thing that made Jordan Peterson popular was his advocacy against the NC6 bill or whatever it is in Canada, where he claimed that it was making misgendering people illegal, which was not the case. It was making it a recognized form of hate speech. So if it met the level of hate speech in terms of the way and the veracity with which you were misgendering someone, it could be prosecuted. It was not there to catch an old senile professor for accidentally saying him instead of her. It was there for people who employed it as a specific attack against people to cause harm. In the same way that racial slurs, in the same way that threats of violence, all these other things that are protected in terms of having actionable offences under hate speech laws are included. They were adding misgendering people to that because it's just it's the same. It's a slur when it comes to how effective it is at disenfranchising and dehumanizing people.
As the boomers entered academia, we saw the development of various departments like women's, race, post-colonial, and queer studies, which largely exist.
Okay. We got the pride flag. I've got bad eyesight. This is probably not the Oppression Olympics. Oh, this is amazing. Department of Intersectionality instead of Biology. It's funny how intersectionality is like a bad word. Like, intersectionality is just looking at how two different ideas can intersect each other and how they affect outcomes on both sides. So race and gender is the easy one. So the intersectionality of race and gender, how does being a person of color affect someone, and how is that affected by whether you're male or female as well? Like, I don't get, like, how is it bad? What's wrong with it? Like, again, all we've seen so far, I need to hurry up.
It is ideological laboratories for the movement that would develop. Social justice theory developed with all these various departments working together in a common ideological coalition. We'll go through these later.
Citation, please.
But a lot of the inconsistencies that came from social justice theory derived from how it was a series of unrelated academic departments that were allied in a common ideological cause.
Citation.
Let me give an example.
Yes.
It's why it's acceptable to change between genders, but not between races. A cornerstone of social justice theory is that oppressive identities are fake and should be deconstructed as a...
So no. One of the big... Okay, actually, there's a good example, I think, in the way Australian identity is constructed when it comes to, like, Indigenous people. I'm trying to find a way to talk about this on stream with a bit more authority, I guess. And I think, yeah, there's no way to do it yet for me. But there is a saying in Indigenous Australians that it doesn't matter how much milk you put in the coffee, it's still coffee. And what that refers to is it doesn't actually matter what color someone's skin is when it comes to their Indigenous heritage. They're Indigenous if they're Indigenous. And, you know, the history to that is what's called the stolen generation. And even in, like, the 70s and stuff, like, this shit is really recent. Like, there are plenty of people that were in the stolen generation that are still navigating life to this day. And essentially it was when people who had an Indigenous parent and a white parent were taken away from their Indigenous family, and they were placed in white homes. And the idea, like we've seen in a lot of different places around the world, the idea was that you would breed out the colored part, and you'd just keep the white part, and putting them in white families would help make sure that they learned white values, that they were able to assimilate into white culture, and that they wouldn't be held back by their indigenous families. What that has led to is that there are a lot of indigenous people, because of this policy that we had in Australia, who can be very fair-skinned, very light-skinned, to the point where they appear white. They look and would be treated by others as if they are white. They experience, at least at a very surface level, white privilege in terms of at least being acknowledged as white in base interactions. However, what Indigenous Australians work very hard to do is to acknowledge that the indigenousness of a person is not based on the skin color. Then it's based on whether or not the local tribe, the people that you come from, whether they recognize you as being part of their Indigenous tribe through the fact that you can actually trace your family back to them. And it is because that is a very visible social norm in terms of how that experience translates through people as a group. Like it is literally a grouping. Like people group around as nationalities, as cultures, as ethnicities. And so that's why that trans ethnicities hasn't emerged. But the thing with gender is that, well, yes, people might have, groups where you get together with the boys, you get together with the women and stuff, but you still socially don't isolate in those groups. You socially don't interact in those ways that, people of a specific culture do. And gender is something that is much more inwardly focused on how you experience the world and how you experience your body and how you experience your identity. And that is why people are more receptive to the idea that gender is how you choose to express yourself, whereas ethnicity is how you fit into the group around you, and mutual recognition. It's a ridiculous comparison to be like, oh, well, if you can be transgender, why can't you be transnational or transethnic? Ethnicities and nationalities are a lot more complicated, I think, than gender.
Moral good in of themselves, while subjugated identities are real, since they pull on the supposedly real or subjective experiences of the oppressed. Thus, for a white person to become a black person is evil, since it infringes upon the black person's positive identity. Meanwhile, for a man to become a woman is good, since it breaks down the oppressive structure of gender, even though in real terms the biological differences between the sexes are far greater than those between the races. Another version of this is that the feminist movement is in contradiction.
That's a bit of a red flag there when he talks about biological difference between the races, because there is no difference in race. We're all one race. We're all humans. We've got different nationalities. We've got different propensities for genetic expression when it comes to particular features, but we're not different races. But we are different genders. It's, yeah. I never I don't know if I've done it accidentally, because you grow up thinking, the white race, the black race, but fuck, that's a bad way to think about it.
With the trans movement, in that if gender doesn't exist and is oppressive, then women's separate identity as women, which is biologically ingrained, carries no value. This is the root of the anti-trans feminist faction called...
What? I'm careful not to talk about trans issues too much, but holy shit, when you cover conservative content on YouTube, it feels like every fucking video comes back to it. Every video has to carve out a nice little area to fit in a little bit of transphobia. If being a woman wasn't an important identity, then dysphoria experienced by trans women who want to experience womanhood wouldn't if you just think about it for a second, it doesn't make sense. It's not a rational critique of trans people.
TERFs. The thing that really elevated social justice into the public consciousness as an important ideology was the process of growing social tensions that I've talked about in these videos, largely driven by a combination of population growth and globalization. This meant the standard of living has in real terms gone down in Western countries for the last 50 years, which when paired with growing inequality caused an immense amount of social tension which created political polarization. This is really plain to see in that all the social justice keywords skyrocketed from complete obscurity to the public view with the failure of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which came shortly after the 2008 financial crash. The 2008 crash resulted in a rapid decline in standard of living, and like every other similar era of history, people fell into extremist ideologies that...
He didn't provide anything showing that the standard of living's gone down. I thought the prevailing wisdom is that the standard of living overall has gone up, and while there's dips, broadly it trends in a positive direction. So I'm not sure I can accept that on face value. Typically what you'll actually find is that unrest with social inequality is actually a factor of societies actually having time and the bandwidth to deal with social inequality. So you'll find developing countries where people will have less propensity to be concerned with social justice because they have more pressing needs. It's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of it, once you've got shelter and food secure, then you'll look at making sure that you've got what do you call it? You've got like your secondary desires, like the things that you want that make life a little bit comfortable, and then sort of the top of the pyramid is like actualization, like when you're a fully satisfied and fully sort of happy person, which is obviously very idealistic. But the idea is that you can't get to actualization until all your needs are met, that your wants are served, and then you get to that point where you I guess that pinnacle of the hierarchy of needs would potentially be where you would start to be a bit more concerned with things like social justice.
That looked for scapegoats. In a system which seemed biased towards privileged white males, for example, if bailing...
All right. Phobia does not mean you're scared. Phobia means that... Did you watch Arachnophobia as a kid? Like, is that where you're getting it from? Like, arachnophobia is fear of spiders. See, this is what happens when you're in primary school and to a certain extent high school. What happens in school is that they teach you things which Terry Pratchett put it this way, and it's oversimplified, but I think it makes the point that you need to learn the little lies before you can learn the big truths. Right. I'll give you a mathematical example because maths is solid and maths, is indisputable in terms of we're not going to find an ideological difference here. A square root is when you find any number when multiplied. Sorry, a square is when you find a number and multiply it by itself. So 4 squared is 16. A square root is when you find a number and you determine what number multiplied by itself gives that number. So the square root of 16 is 4, right? Really easy. What you get taught what I got taught in high school and stuff is that there's no such thing as a square root of a negative number, because if you multiply -4 by -4, you get positive 16. So you can't actually get the square root of -16. That's something kids get taught when they're learning for the first time how to find square roots and how to square numbers. They get taught that if you square a negative multiplied by a negative is a positive, and so therefore you can't find a square root. So you actually can find the square root of a number. So when you get to more advanced mathematics, it typically is something that you might learn in the first year of university education. You employ what's called an imaginary number in order to facilitate the finding of the square root of -16. And to find the square root of -16, what you'll do is you go -16, then you'll do a second line and you'll go I squared equals -1. And then you'll go 16i squared, and you'll find the square root of that. Now you've got a positive number. The square root of 16 is 4. The square root of I squared is I. Therefore, the square root of -16 is 4i, where I squared equals -1. That is where we've taken a simple concept that we learn in primary school, and we build upon that as we learn more, because we have a greater capacity to understand those more intricate, I guess, truths and the more complicated things that actually tell us a bit more about reality. Phobia is the same thing. We get taught very early on that phobia means fear, but it can actually also mean a irrational dislike, distrust, to have negative emotions towards something for no rational reason. And so to be transphobic is not to be scared of them, to be scared of trans people, to be homophobic is not because you're scared of gay people. It's because that you have an irrational dislike, distrust, or basically you're bigoted against a group. You are phobic for that group. And even even in this circumstance where you reject that phobia has a broader meaning than what you might have been taught in grade school, what you still need to understand is how people are employing a word. Even if you disagree with the way they're using it, their definition, surely you understand that when someone makes the statement that, you know, for example, the Texas governor is transphobic, surely you understand what they're saying is not, I think that he will run away if a trans person appears in front of him. What they mean is that he is acting in a bigoted way, he is acting in a hateful way, he is acting in a destructive way towards trans identities. So the idea that phobic doesn't mean scared is invalid, and even if it was valid, is still a poor way of communicating with someone that's got a different idea to you, because you're deliberately misconstruing what they're saying because you think on a technicality they're miscommunicating, despite the fact that their intent is very clear. So yes, you were wrong.
Out the banks, well, the economy fell apart. It looked reasonable. At the same time, the internet made populist movements like social justice easier to form. The internet made populism of both right and left-wing varieties more powerful, and we definitely see this with social justice, a movement promulgated and advanced collectively through the internet rather than through more mainstream top-down political ideologies. I always wondered why social justice...
What does that mean to have an idea migrate top-down as a political ideology? The only two possible answers to what he can mean there is that he means that political parties will present these ideas and influence people to think those ideas are valid, or that academia would find these truths and then send them down. That's not how things work. Generally, people will... it'll be from the ground up, that ideas will come up, and that will influence how political parties act. Political parties are responsive to people. I'm not saying they don't manipulate people, but typically they will actually be more responsive to what is popular as opposed to trying to create things that are popular. It's the same way that you see Republicans have basically tried to co-opt, the notion that, things were better way back when, with the Make America Great slogan, as opposed to coming up with something outside of that.
Behaved in such a strategically irrational way. I mean, this is a movement that literally shits on its own followers as terrible people and actively looks...
Socially justice being strategically inept. All capitals here. That is interesting. It targets masculinity as toxic. Wrong. Oh my God. So... all tigers are cats, not all cats are tigers. All men are masculine, not all masculinity is toxic. So, number one, straw man. Whatever a white or straight person does, they're evil. Again, we're talking in ideology here. We're not talking in examples again, which we still haven't got to in this video. Which brings in very little incentive to join the movement. I'm sorry, if doing right is predicated on incentives, you are an idiot. I can relate to thinking phobia is an exclusively fear-based response. It is a line I used when I was a Christian, and yeah, it's certainly not how it is used in the collective political spheres today. The movement is predicated upon real-world goals that are unachievable, complete equality. Fuck. Imagine thinking that everyone being treated equal is unachievable.
It's the most powerful.
Rather than an inner oral compass. Is an oral compass something that finds... Anyway. Pushes hardest for the smallest groups. There are more Salvadorian Americans than transgender people, however, they are given preference. I could go on. It's more likely that people know a trans person than a Salvadorian American. It's quite possible that the Salvadorian Americans are a focused group, not a broadly spread group. So, yeah. I'm not saying it's not a problem that, again, this is a really common issue for Indigenous Australians, is that they are 3% of our population. And democracies aren't equipped to provide for 3% minorities. And I think that's a problem that needs to be solved, not a problem that needs to be accepted as it's unachievable, because that's not good enough for me.
One of the largest groups in society and says they're evil. But I didn't realize that this is primarily a mob-driven movement, not one that's controlled top-down. When I say social justice is irrational, I'm not being biased. I'm stating a literal fact of its philosophy that even its founders would agree with. Like some right-wing parody of left-wingers, they believe that logic and objective reality are Western constructions. They take the postmodernist argument that all ways of knowing are social constructions.
What?
And combine it with the Marxist viewpoint that all culture can be explained as a struggle between the oppressor and the oppressed. The Smithsonian, or the most important government-owned museum system in America, released this chart.
I think I've seen that before,
which went about describing whiteness with characteristics like hard work, being on time, or rational objective thinking. The first
it's really funny, right? Being on time, right? Let's just pick that one, because I don't want to go over it too much. The reason that's considered white culture and whiteness is because, let's use a silly example, right? If you work in an office job and you're expected to be there at 9 o'clock and you're expected to leave there at 5 o'clock, and if you get there at 10 past 9 in the morning and your manager chews you out, writes you up, and you've now got a warning on file, 3 of those, and you'll be terminated. That is ridiculous, in my opinion, right? Like, I'm of the opinion that unless there is a business need, there should be a certain amount of flexibility in terms of what time you get to work. Your work hours should be reflective of what you've agreed to. But, if you get to work 10 minutes late and you leave 10 minutes late, like you get in at 10 past 9, leave at 10 past 5, then who gives a shit? There's plenty of places around the world, including, part of my heritage is from Tonga. And a lot of Pacific Islands that will refer to island time, where they're a lot more relaxed about that sort of thing. And that can be confronting for people that come from another culture and they, assimilate into predominantly white culture spaces. And to be faced with that kind of expectation that they don't fully understand or they don't fully anticipate, it really is putting a priority into whiteness versus pragmatic assessment of how a workplace should operate. I'll be honest, that's more me and my sort of struggle against bad management styles that have been accepted as good work ethic. So I'm probably not the best place for that discussion.
These are just objectively good things, and that societies that work hard automatically crush those that are lazy and are wealthier, but also that these aren't white either. The Celts in Britain at the birth of Christ had a value system that didn't value hard work or objectivity, and they're equally white. Meanwhile, the Muslim world used to be in the cutting edge of science. Similarly, if you go to a university STEM class in North America today, most of the students will be Asian. The most punctual, hardworking people in the world today are in Asia. Science obviously isn't a Western...
What's the suicide rate in Japan? How's that work culture going for the salarymen in Japan? How's that going for people that are worried that if they leave before the boss, that they'll get fired? And so they spend 12, 13 hours at their desk, much of that time sitting there doing nothing, waiting for the boss to leave because they can't be seen to go first. What's that say about, those cities in Japan where it's normalized to have business capsule hotels where people will sleep in, coffin-sized beds? They're great. Don't get me wrong. I love a capsule hotel as a tourist, but to have that as a infrastructure to support people that work so late that they need to stay at a capsule hotel because they need to get back to the office so early for a meeting that it is easier, cheaper, and more efficient than going home. You can't just sit there and go, Asian work ethic is amazing, without actually understanding that, that actually has a cost in their society as well. Like, it's ridiculous.
Way of knowing, since other cultures are wholeheartedly embracing a scientific worldview, since it can be objectively proven. Ask an educated Indian if they support the oppressive Western way of scientific knowing, or their traditional magic systems, which, by the way, all races used to believe in. They'd say science without a thought. This all ends up being a backwards form of racism that exists to assuage the guilt of smug liberals at the expense of actually oppressed groups. Look at rap culture.
And this is funny, given that, that's a strong proponent of this white culture are conservative Christians. So if you want to talk to me about magic and shit, and you want to pretend it's either scientific objectiveness of the right or the magic and mysticism of the left, yeah.
culture, in which modern culture literally encourages antisocial traits like crime, drug usage, or broken families in the African American community, since to judge it would be racism. However, this has really negative effects on the Black community. We should be supporting the productive elements of the African American community, not the most antisocial. Alternatively, look at West Coast cities like Vancouver or Los Angeles that have horrifying drug and homelessness problems, largely caused by the lack of an ability to judge on the part of a morally handicapped elite. The city of Vancouver had a policy of not judging homelessness and drug usage, with their only real policy being having clean, government-controlled sites to shoot heroin in. I was staying in downtown Los Angeles last week, and the homelessness crisis had made an otherwise wealthy and cool area into a deeply unpleasant and nearly uninhabitable place with a sheer amount of crazy homeless guys. However, mental illness...
That is just... I will never let go of the point that people will criticize progressive cities for having homeless problems when what they are is not anti-homeless. They don't install the dehumanizing city infrastructure of like spikes on places where they might be able to lie down or sit or rest, where they don't put, basically architectural features designed to prevent them from occupying any space. And they're just disjointed away from cities to wherever else, where I imagine a lot of them actually migrate to cities that are not as abusive towards the homeless populations, and to then pretend that because it's visible in these cities, because they don't sweep them under the carpet, that therefore they're worse with homeless people than cities that do essentially just sweep them under the carpet. That's it's a bold take. I'll give them that.
And drug abuse is when people aren't in their right minds, and considering that Western societies had practically none of either 60 years ago, means that this is a pretty easily solvable problem. These addicted people and their families whose lives they've...
Right, so he's saying there's pretty much no homelessness, but this graph exists. I'm assuming these gaps are where data doesn't exist. So, at no point was there no homelessness. And again, is this graph a percentage of the population, or is this graph charting actual numbers, in which case you would expect it to grow with the population, and it would grow exponentially in a curve because that's how population is growing?
Often really hurt or ruined, would probably in the long view be thankful for a government that doesn't act like a smug, negligent parent. At its heart, social justice is a poorly constructed religion more than anything else. Just look at its main text today, like How to Be an Anti-Racist and White Fragility, which boil down to an idea...
Haven't read any of these. Robin DiAngelo, for all I can tell, is a fucking idiot. Ibram X. Kendi, I think he's fine from what I've heard, but I haven't read any of his stuff or seen any of his stuff. Funnily enough, Ibram X. Kendi featured in the stream. Yes, he didn't feature, but he was mentioned by the person we were looking at on the stream last night. So fun.
Of original sin, in which white people must admit they are always racist no matter what they do, and nearly every action a white person does is inherently racist due to the racist structure of society. Nowhere are actual steps to deal with racial inequities in the real world proposed.
Assimilationists can position any racial group as the superior standard that another racial group should be measuring themselves against, the benchmark they should be trying to reach. Assimilationists typically position white people as a superior standard. Make a list of 10 phrases or sayings used in everyday conversation in the media that reinforce whiteness or white people as the superior standard. You know what? It is really just shocking to see refugees from basically Europe escaping a war. Like, you see it in the Middle East and you see it in Africa, but to see it in Europe, oh my God. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on at the moment.
The cardinal flaw of the modern world, which our descendants will just facepalm continually, is our arrogance and overestimating human abilities. All of the cool philosophies that developed since the Industrial Revolution, such as communism, fascism, and the various fads that have passed, all failed since they acted as humans, and especially humans in positions of power, are capable of doing everything. This is a critical flaw in social justice philosophy, which believes that human nature is inherently changeable and all disparities can be solved. A great example of this comes with disparities.
Wait. A flaw of social justice is believing people can change?
This is a critical flaw in social justice philosophy, which believes that human nature is inherently changeable and all disparities can be solved.
Have we not changed in the tens of thousands of years that humans have been on the earth? I mean, I know it's a lot more than that. I wasn't sure how high it was, so I didn't want to go too far, but I'm pretty sure humans have changed a fucking lot.
A great example of this comes with disparities, in which social justice philosophy believes that if there's any disparity, it must be the consequence of oppression. This ignores how immense disparities are the norm across almost every field you can think of. For example, every single one of the 20 tallest mountains in the world is in Asia. Or alternatively, the Germans ended up being the top piano manufacturers for all of history. The idea that oppression...
Were any of those things because... were Russians the best piano makers in the world because of a Russian gene that made them piano makers, or were the material conditions that led to them not only being the best at it, but also being the best positioned to economically take advantage of circumstances to be piano makers? Like, this is the point. The left's point is that there is no Russian gene that makes them better piano makers. There are circumstances that exist that we can affect that made that the best option for Russia and made them excel at that. And again, I'm taking that as his word. I've never heard that before, but hey, it's innocuous enough that we can just grant the premise for the purposes of the story. And it's the same thing when we talk about, he's mentioned crime in black neighborhoods. Is that the neighborhood, or is that the blackness? Is that the circumstances that people find themselves in, or is that their culture? Is that the over-policing because of Broken Window's policing strategy, where if there's crime there, we send more police there, and if there's more police there, we find more crime because there's more police looking for crime. That's what you'd expect. But then we see more crime there, so we keep sending more police there. So we have a lot of black criminals being arrested because that's where the police are, and somehow equating that to, well, that's a problem that black people have to deal with in America. To me, it's common sense to look at this and go, what are the circumstances that lead to these outcomes? But this person, I wish I knew his name because I don't like calling him by his YouTube channel, but this person wants to tell us that this is how the world is and we can't do anything about it. He doesn't actually go to the point of asking, why is the world like this? Can we actually deduct the circumstances that create this outcome? He just takes the outcome prima facie. That's what must be the truth of humanity that we need to then operate with. Ugh.
Is the cause of almost every social factor is silly when you look at the horrifically legally repressed Chinese in Indonesia, who own 71% of the country's economy, while also only being 3% of the population. In short, you can't find a single statistic that isn't incredibly power law distributed. Take the gender pay gap, in which the average woman makes 76 cents for the average man, which has effectively been the rallying cry for the modern feminist movement. However, once you account for children, women actually make more money.
The gender pay gap is not about a per hour payment. It's not about a female doctor and a male doctor at the same hospital getting paid different amounts. In America, maybe, I don't know. Right? In Australia, that shit doesn't fly because that, particularly in public hospitals, it's a standard payment. The pay gap exists because women have social pressures on them where they feel like they are more expected to be the home carers. They take breaks in their careers to raise children. They take more flexible jobs with less pay so they can raise the children. They take, 5 years out of their career to look up, 6-7 years out of their career to get their kids to school age, where they are not making 401k contributions or superannuation. They're not making progress on their career ladder, so they end up making less money overall and by a pretty substantial amount. That is the concern of the pay gap when it comes to men and women. It is not about controlling for home care. It is not about controlling for differences in the jobs that they take. It is about the overall social outcomes of an entire gender, 51% of the population, and how their outcomes do not match with what you'd expect if things were equal, because they have different societal pressures on them. And we never see this discussed. I want to see a conservative who discusses the gender pay gap, who accounts for social expectations on women being different from social expectations on men. We still see all the time that women feel like they are more likely to have to do more of the housework than men, even when both are working full-time. And yet we never see this in the discussion. We just see graphs where they go, well, jobs at the same level, jobs at the same level at the same company. But this is what matters. Pay gap for all jobs. Unless we think there's something inherent about the female gender, the fairer gender, that makes them want less pay, then we need to ask why this gap exists across all jobs, instead of worrying about this number here, this number here, this number here. That's small enough to be the exceptions. Particularly here in Britain, 0.8%, where the pay gap disappears. It's a tiny fraction of this percentage here. 2.7, these are still massive differences. And full-time pay. So again, we have the issue again where when we look at employment in particular, if they adjust for full-time equivalent pay and don't account for what is called underemployment. That is when people aren't employed full-time or aren't employed to the level they wish they were employed. That's often a hidden statistic. So especially when you start to see, I was being sarcastic when I said fair agenda. Satirical, not sarcastic. I forgot where I was going.
Once experience and hours worked is accounted for, you find it shrinks to 96 cents.
Experience, exactly what I was fucking saying, right? Their experience, they lose experience because they're expected to stay home and look after the kids. I'm going to virtue signal, not in my house. I'm going to try and take more time off work because I would hate for my partner to lose her opportunity and have to spend the time at home. Hopefully we can do it about half and half, but I do have more leave than her because I've been in the workforce longer.
Social justice believes all hierarchies are inherently oppressive, and hierarchies based on actual skills and ability are all evil. An example of this is that when Western businesses go to third world countries...
Wrong.
And pay workers their wages lower than first world countries, it's called oppressive. These companies almost always pay higher wages than the local economy does, and are paying the wages that are allowed at the lower productivity level.
God, I wish I could justify underpaying. I remember thinking this, right? I remember believing this. So, any of you that know me that have been around since I started streaming, there was streams that I was on where I described myself as socially progressive but economically center, because I sort of had this sort of vague feeling that, like, hey, you know, if you pay low wages in a developing country, you know, it just what this guy's saying, it's above, you know, what they would get otherwise. Like their opportunity, if you know, company X wasn't there paying them $2 an hour, is that they would make $2 a week trying to find things to recycle on the streets and stuff. And so it's actually a net benefit for these companies to be there, even if they aren't paying a super fair amount. The problem is that those companies are going to these developing countries and they're extracting value from that country, and they're taking that product into first world countries and they're selling them for ridiculous amounts of money, and they're keeping the broad lion's share of the profits in terms of that excess value. And again, we have another opportunity for him to talk to us about how he has got this political background knowledge and how he's read all the books and how he's gone, you know, to all these university classes to learn about things. And it's another opportunity for him to point out how Marxism and the struggle between, you know, the exploitation of labor creates oppression and creates these opportunities for these power structures to actually come in place. And yet he has walked straight past it to point out that, hey, at least they're making more than what, you know, companies in the country are often able to pay them, because those countries are, you know, not as able to pay as we are. So it's justified when we pay them a shit pay.
In the third world. Yet another example is how social justice treats the natural hierarchy like teacher and student or parent and child as oppressive. Modern left-wing doctrine says teachers should defer to what students want as much as possible, and parents should listen to their child's whims, even when in most circumstances, the parents and teachers are wiser and not letting...
I reject this claim. I reject this. I've never seen this advocated for on the left or in social justice circles. I've never said it. I've never heard anyone say it. I think this is a straw man.
Makes those peoples worse off. Letting your child or student do whatever they want is actively harming them in the long term, since it isn't enforcing discipline, so they can't internalize the self-control that would allow them to thrive and hold society together.
Self-control,
However, social justice doesn't believe in real knowledge, love, or hierarchies of skill, with the only force in the world being cynical power games. Think of how many schools don't teach real historical dates, for example, which means no real history actually ends up getting taught. Or how many parents let their kids act like demons, screaming or acting like spoiled brats, which will hold them back in the future at some point.
I'm not going to say it.
They won't learn to be polite and considerate. Social justice starts with the assumption that all humans are like blank pawns that are interchangeable, completely ignoring all historic and cultural factors and a purposeful stupidity. For example, in psychological studies, we've found men tend to be more interested in things and women in people. This explains why, say, this YouTube channel has turned out to be 96% men, or engineers and craft.
Hear that, ladies? You're just not interested in things. You got other stuff going on, so you're not interested in things. Did he literally say, not interested in things?
Logical studies, we found men tend to be more interested in things and
things. Not even cars and sport. He literally just said men are more interested in things. What is the interest that women have that is not a thing then? Fuck me. This is a scripted video. This person wrote this down, presumably edited it, and then recorded it and uploaded it without thinking about the fact that he just said men are more interested in things.
than people. This explains why, say, this YouTube channel has turned out to be 96% male, or engineers and craftsmen are heavily male. Likewise, why women are in
craftsmen. So not just things, now art, right? Art is a masculine activity. Right, this is toxic masculinity. I'm not even capping on that. Like, he wants to bitch about toxic masculinity, and then he wants to come out and bring toxic masculinity into his video and pretend that it doesn't exist. And he's just literally said that men are more interested and more likely to be engineers and artists. Holy shit. I feel like women tend to be more open with being artistic, at least online, from what I've seen anyway. Although there's a bit of a bias for me because I see a lot of cosplayers and stuff that do tend to be women.
Or engineers and craftsmen are heavily male.
Craftsmen. Okay, he probably means like blacksmiths and shit, right? He probably means like real old school craftsmen.
Psychiatry, medicine, and childcare more than men. This isn't due to oppression, since this trend is most pronounced in the most gender-equal societies like Scandinavia or Israeli kibbutzes. Left-wingers think that human nature is inherently malleable, which it largely isn't. Although nurture does have big effects, so does nature. This leads to the left-wing obsession with controlling the discourse, or telling people what words they can and can't say, or with controlling pop culture.
I'm pretty sure nurture is hugely impactful on the way people grow up. Oh my god.
For a person who believes that humans aren't in control of objective reality, understanding objective truth and how to deal with it is the most important thing, since it allows us to deal with an ever-changing, complicated world. Thus, freedom of speech must be protected, since it allows societies to look for the truth most effectively. However, from the social justice viewpoint, that humans construct human nature, controlling how people think, allows humans to be able to engineer our nature. Anyone who reads any history knows that human nature stays the same no matter what people believe. People can scream at the top of their lungs that their ideology or religion will abolish cruelty and corruption, but once that group gets into power, their elite, unless given incentive structures against those things, will perpetuate.
We have objective data that shows that people have better, freer, and more constructive opportunities in life around the world today than they did 500 years ago. The human condition has completely changed over time and continues to change as we have more opportunities to develop as a species. I mean, it's really easy to go back as far as early tribal human civilization, where there was a lot more friction between groups locally, because there was a much smaller bubble of what we included as the in-group. And social justice is about continuing to expand that bubble, because over time we've expanded the bubble from tribes to nation states, and from nation states to actual nations that we have today. And today we've expanded that bubble even more, because broadly speaking, people, in the West specifically, will look at other people in the West, and, even conservatives will acknowledge that Australians, Britons, Americans, and Canadians are all part of the cultural West, and will see them as part of the in-group. And so that bubble has been continually growing and expanding. And, there are people that have been left behind in that bubble that we continually try to incorporate into that as progressives, as people that, might care about social justice. And yet he wants to tell us that this has never changed over history. That historically speaking, people have never, been malleable about who counts as a valid person, as a valid, member of their society. It's crazy. Yeah, demons suck. You're asking questions that are leading into topics that I am not talking about on the stream. So, I'm happy to take or respond to questions that deal with what we are talking about, what is currently happening. But asking me questions about Ukraine and, particularly specific people is not going to be conducive to a positive exchange, because I'm not going to talk on things that I'm not reasonably well versed on, and particularly when it comes to specific people doing specific things within that Ukraine situation. I'm not up to date on that. So yeah, thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. I'm too kind. I just let it roll and just, yeah.
In fact, the people who are often most dangerous are those that believe themselves to be good, since they have no protections against their own evil.
That's true of everyone. That is true of everyone. Okay, unironically, I think that even the most toxic, bigoted, conservative Christian who preaches that, homosexuality is gay, I unironically think that they believe that they're good people. And I think they're wrong, and I think that they should still be mocked and they should still be ousted from society as long as they continue to hold those beliefs. But, oh my God, there's a word on that screen I just saw. But like to say that, social justice people, they think they're good, but they're not really. It's like, well, you need a mirror for that, because that's true of any regime that has any sort of political power. Everyone thinks that they're good. Everyone thinks that they're right. I don't think anyone, well, not anyone. I think the rule typically is that people in their own mind feel like they are being good people. And I think where you can actually find the difference between actually good people and you might think you're a good person, but you're not really. It comes down to, again, what we've been talking about the bubble expanding of who you count as people. And I think that for him who says that, human society hasn't changed ever, and that to think it's malleable is ridiculous. Well, just look at who we think is people. We used to think slaves weren't people. We used to think women weren't people. We used to think foreigners weren't people. And that's not the case anymore.
Screams at you for saying the wrong words. They think that you are allowing racism to perpetuate, and they're gradually engineering the human race to superiority. This is very convenient for them, since controlling the discourse like Hollywood or school board curriculums is very easy, while they continue to eschew actually effective real-world measures.
You've already shown us this slide.
Trade schools, improved education, more effective communities, and stable families. However, not a single modern social justice government is pushing for measures.
I come from a fatherless home, and I still have a house.
Like that. I mean, just look at defund the police, where even though police departments are often corrupt and do really inhumane things, the number of unarmed black men who are killed by the police is actually relatively small, and weakening the police actually results in far more black deaths because it increases black-on-black crime, which is a far higher number.
Defunding the police is not about reducing responses to dangerous situations. It's about diverting funds from the police to more appropriate response avenues. So sending people that might be experts in dealing with people that are having a mental health crisis instead of people with a fucking gun to people having a mental health crisis. Or, defunding at the very least the fucking training I've seen around, I've seen videos of the sort of training that police get in some places in America, where essentially they're taught to fear everyone and to shoot before anything can possibly happen that might put their fellow officers in danger. There was a video I was watching where they were teaching recruits. They were going through like role play simulations of like potential events where there might be a hostile person on the street, and the recruits were like unsure about whether or not they should shoot. And the drill sergeant was like, "If you can't make the decision to shoot in this circumstance, don't bother coming in tomorrow." And that should be defunded.
Social justice makes the weird logical jump that all disparities in racial income must come from racism today. This ignores that, first of all, let's say the difference between African American and white incomes is caused by many factors, including racism, but also factors starting in Africa, geography, culture, and historical chance.
What? You want to blame something that happened in Africa for why African Americans today don't have equal economic mobility? You serious? Migration to the city seems to have resulted in a rise in antisocial traits such as crime, vagrancy, that's me, and family breakdowns. That's migration to the city that caused that, did it?
To say that deconstructing modern racism would help negate all of that history is insane. Something the movement always ignores is that if you look at an ethnic breakdown of income by groups in America, it's clear that America is not primarily based off oppression.
I think if you're a police... Oh my God. So the most recent thing that I looked at was the no-knock entrance by police. I forget what state they're in, but it was where there was the young kid on the couch who had a gun, didn't point it at anyone, and the cops shot them. as a result of the no-knock warrant. I think that's a really good example of police escalating a situation and responding to this situation that they escalated with violence, killing someone that should not be dead. And you know what? If you push me on the point, I will say that I would rather that people who are police officers err on the side of caution when it comes to not shooting civilians than to err on the side of, well, what if I get hurt? That's the fucking job. The job is to protect people, not to protect police officers. And that's not to say that they shouldn't do everything in their power to stay safe and to keep each other safe, but none of that should ever be at the expense of a civilian that has not actually presented them with any harm. Now, bad cops exist, but the problem is when we find a bad cop, they get protected by the good cops. They get protected by the unions. They get protected by their precinct. They get transferred and given other opportunities. They're never justice for what they've done. Because we're not talking about rogue cops that then get like absolutely dumpstered by the justice system as a result of doing something bad. We see bad cops get excused, protected. We see people on the streets protesting that anything should happen to those police officers because they think that it's fine that civilians get shot as a matter of course for police activity in America. Okay, that's just conspiratorial. So let's keep on going with the video.
British Americans are on the lower end of income among white Americans, while the highest earners are some of the most oppressed groups like Asians and Jews. You see big fluctuations inside the black community, with descendants of immigrants from the Caribbean and black people whose ancestors were free before the Civil War being much richer than the rest of the black community. Similarly, among Hispanic groups, race has nothing to do with wealth. The mostly white Puerto Ricans are much poorer than the darker-skinned Mexicans or Dominicans. Social justice theory believes in this thing called intersectionality, which holds that there's this underlying oppressive structure to society that oppresses women, gay people, ethnic minorities, etc.
Intersectionality is not explicitly about a web of oppression, but a web of influences that dictate outcomes. So there's intersectionality on whether or not I have success based on the fact that I can pass pretty much as white in most cases. There's also an intersectionality in the fact that I don't pass as white when people look at just my name written on a piece of paper. So not even explaining intersectionality correctly.
All at the same time. And once we remove it, oppression will be gone. They take this from Marxism, which has the utopian idea that once the capitalists are gone, the world will be rich and the working classes will live in plenty. But both are conspiracy theories. Saying that there's this secret cultural force that is secretly causing all of this oppression around the world without any reference to its own self-interest and only indirect proof that it exists literally fits the definition of conspiracy theory. The good way to look for conspiracy theories is that they string a bunch of factions together into a black or white worldview. Yeah, let's ignore the massive differences inside the black or white community or men and women.
Ah, okay, so he's... Yep.
Create these binaries. One of the defining features of social justice is that it formed due to a confluence of different academic departments shoehorned together under the common alliance of intersectionality. Let me do the briefest possible rundown of each of these schools. The first is queer theory, which is the most postmodern and believes that human sexuality and gender is built off oppressive social structures rather than being a Darwinistic necessity, which is built off ensuring the survival of...
Yeah, the rotten apple analogy only works if they throw the apple out. Unfortunately, they don't. They just bury the apple deeper in the fucking barrel.
The human race. It purports the theory of a gender spectrum that isn't...
Wait, what? How are we back on gender? Jesus Christ. I suppose we're talking about social justice. I shouldn't be too worried about it.
Let me do the briefest possible rundown of each of these schools. The first is queer theory, which is the most postmodern and believes that human sexuality and gender is built off oppressive social structures rather than being a Darwinistic necessity, which is built off ensuring the survival of the human race. It purports the theory of a gender spectrum that is entirely without scientific evidence as a starting point. You know when a kid just keeps on asking you why?
Sorry, there's no evidence for people experiencing and expressing gender on a spectrum. So we don't have big, hairy, rough as guts men, less hairy men, smoother, more effeminate men, androgynous, NB, masculine. Like, so you can't just say gender doesn't have a spectrum.
And then why again, and then why, and feels really smart once you can't answer the fifth why. That's queer analysis, which tries to break every concept down into logical salami slicing into irrelevance. An example I gave a friend is when we were on vacation together in a log cabin, is that the queer analysis would try to break down how the act of us being in a cabin really meant nothing and was inherently oppressive. Then there's post-colonial theory, which largely exists to blame all the...
I'm sorry, he needs to explain to me how there is actually a spectrum of people expressing gender and how that expression doesn't correlate with a gender spectrum theory in terms of something worthy of study in academia. Like, you can see it with your eyeballs. It's fucking Mardi Gras in Sydney at the moment. Like, it's, you know, one of the biggest gay events in Australia happening right now. And I can guarantee you that if you go walking through the Mardi Gras in Sydney, if I jump on my friend's Instagram who's down there at the moment, I'm sure I will see a fucking rainbow of expression when it comes to gender identities. So explain it. Explain it without telling me it's not real, because it exists. It's a thing. We can see, we can experience it, we can find it in the society around us. And yet he wants to say it's not real.
All the failures of post-colonial countries on European colonization, ignoring any other factors, and even saying that we should respect magical ways of thinking on a similar wavelength of thinking about modern science. Even reaching points like...
It's not magic. It's not magic to recognize that there's a spectrum of gender. There was no magic spell involved when I was fortunate enough to be able to do some photography of some drag queens. Like, they just exist. It just happens. It is a thing.
Like the West trying to promulgate education in the colonies or anthropologically study local cultures in a scientific way was cultural imperialism.
God, I hate that sort of picture.
Latino studies, which rather than actually studying those cultures with any curiosity, turn them into grievance programs which largely blame Western civilization for every failing in those societies, which in its own way becomes its own form of racism that prevents these people from having any...
Developing country, my friend. I almost said third world earlier today, but you should say developing country. It's not very woke of you to call it third world.
White man's story. Women's studies works exactly the same, except replacing women for ethnic minorities and men for white people. You have the body shaming and ableism movement, which don't have academic departments, but are more widespread in social justice as a culture in the broader...
God forbid we see people with disabilities. God forbid we see different body types. What was that movie recently, the Pixar Encanto, where there's this buff as fuck character who's like singing this amazing song and is like picking up buildings and shit. And like, I saw people have a meltdown on Reddit about how it's not okay for women to be women anymore, despite the fact there was a range of fucking women in that movie. I haven't seen the movie, I've just seen the song because people were bitching about it, so I felt I had to watch it.
The body shaming movement's really negative, and that it tells fat people it isn't their fault and it's society's fault for not saying fat people are pretty. However, even though there is cultural fluctuation, beauty standards are genetically driven and based off Darwinistic fitness. At the same time...
He needs to go to the Louvre. He said he did historical studies. He said he knows history, so he should know that plump is pretty, right? He should know that. He should understand that it is culturally driven. It is not genetically driven.
Beauty standards are genetically driven and based
They're not genetically driven. I mean, no, I'm not going to say anything.
At the same time, being fat is objectively unhealthy. Even though our society puts out unhealthy body expectations, going the opposite direction is just stupid.
Anyway, chubby people seen as attractive in the early... So he knows that he's wrong. Where food was scarcer. So yes, culturally. I think they would count as obese. Is this okay on YouTube? Is this because it's art? Sorry, children, cover your eyes.
It's so depressing to see a generation of young women being fat, badly put together and spewing anti-male feminist propaganda, and then wondering why they're lonely and no one will marry them. They've been sold an image of the world that's just not true. The ableist movement also says that
there's just as many fat men. I know he showed a lot of photos of women there being what he thinks is fat, whereas I think, particularly the last one, yeah, I don't know about that. But there's just as many fat men. There's just as many. There's a reason dad bod is considered sexy at the moment.
People with physical disabilities aren't actually disabled. It's just society's fault for not recognizing them as normal. It would be good if society made it easier on the disabled, many of whom are veterans that have sacrificed for their nations, but this philosophy is pushed to horrifying extremes, an example of which is the TikTok mental health influencers who pretend to have mental illnesses in order to get attention. This in turn is...
What has that got to do with the left? What has that got to do with social justice? That's clout sharking. And no one gives a shit about those people. They're awful people.
Caused a spike in large problems due to the glorification of these mental illnesses, which means lots of Gen Z kids pretend to have mental illnesses in order to look cool.
Yeah, but that's got nothing to do with progressive social justice to not erase people with disabilities. Actually, yeah, Aunt Jo, that's a good point about the people conforming to Western beauty standards. You see a lot of that in Korea. You see a lot of, and Japan as well, where it's possible to buy like tape that will try and shape their eyes to make them more round and more, Hollywood style. I can imagine there's a lot of complexities with not being white in a culturally white world that we live in terms of like Hollywood and beauty standards and stuff.
Part of this.
You know what? It occurs to me that I've never heard anyone talk about their experiences like that to any great extent. That might actually be something worth trying to do a bit of YouTube searching on.
Social justice coalition's environmentalism, which is honestly one of my soft spots to the movement.
Fuck yeah, environmentalism.
That we really need to get on, and nature's beautiful and ought to be preserved, and the right should be blamed more than the left for often just not caring, but the social justice attempt at climate change just isn't effective. You know what would help us turn away from carbon?
You know what's not effective about... No, oh, for fuck's sake, do not talk about renewable energy, you motherfucker. Oh my god, I hate the renewable versus nuclear debate. I fucking hate it to fucking tears. Like, holy shit. Oh my god. Oh.
Carbon energy sources, nuclear energy, and even more investment into nuclear research, which would allow these reactors to be far more efficient. However, the social justice movement is always...
Wrong. Nuclear technology is what is called a mature technology. That is, dollars spent on nuclear energy are going to amount to less increase in the effectiveness of nuclear energy compared to renewable energy, which is what is called an immature technology. On top of that, one of the big advantages of renewables that nuclear does not have is renewables are able to scale. So renewable technology actually presents an opportunity for people to actually be engaged with and part of the solution. For example, there is a business owner in Queensland, a company called Solar Power something or other. I forget the exact name of the company, but essentially they run a business where what they do is if there's a community who is cut off from power and through a natural disaster or through lightning or through whatever it is, they lose power, he's able to deploy solar panels and a battery to get them set up so they can actually get some basic amenities working again so that they can sort of get through what they can get through with solar power renewables. That's one of the advantages of renewable technologies. It scales down to that level. One of the big things we have in Australia is a massive amount of solar panels that are deployed to provide people's hot water systems. And the excess energy from that is fed back into the grid, and people can actually, pay off their solar panels by feeding power into the grid because of the solar panels and stuff. So there's all sorts of ways that renewables can be deployed at a tiny scale. So you can have small businesses actually start up and innovate products, innovate services around this technology that actually uplifts the economy. That's before we even get to the fact that renewables are adding at a faster rate every year energy to the world's power grid, and they continue to perform at super high rates. And that is despite the fact that in many countries they are underfunded. In many countries they are overpriced compared to fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are heavily subsidized by governments all over the world. And with all that going against them, they still manage to add ridiculously large amounts to the power grid. And every time I see on Twitter, I know it's really hot on Twitter, and I know that this is something not everyone agrees with me on, where everyone says, you know what, the answer to coal and oil is to switch to nuclear. I think that's just wrong. I think that is a misapplication of how likely it is to get nuclear running, particularly in countries that don't already have nuclear power plants, because there is a lot of fear that goes along with it. B, it doesn't take into account how long it actually takes to set up not just a nuclear power plant, but also the supply chain to feed that nuclear power plant, because not every country mines uranium like Australia. And C, the time it takes to get to that point means that if we were spending that money on renewable technologies instead of nuclear technologies, there is a very high chance that renewables will actually get to the point where they'll start feeding just as much as a nuclear plant would in the time it takes a nuclear plant to get up and running. There was an argument on Twitter about, I'll say an argument sounds like it was more, had more, that fucking thing, more facts behind it than it actually did. Because there was someone that was like, oh, nuclear has to be the way because, renewables just can't do it. And you say, well, here, South Australia, 50% of their energy requirements are met by renewables today. And Australia doesn't count. Australia's got nothing to do with it. Nuclear is illegal in Australia, so they don't even know what they're talking about. And then pointing out to them, well, no, actually, we have uranium mines. We're actually part of the nuclear power supply chain for other countries. So it's not like we don't know anything about it or can't actually do it. We just choose to go with renewables, in states that have left-wing party leaders. It is a fucking topic. Oh my God. We're all over the place with this video.
Against nuclear energy. Likewise, the best way to lower carbon emissions would be to replace coal with natural gas, but the social justice wing has continually blocked policies supporting natural gas. Thus, in fact, social justice has hurt the environment far more than helping it. What do all these threads have in common? Well, first of all, they hold that...
It's like a bully grabbing your hand, making you punch yourself and going, stop hitting yourself. No. You can't hold the left responsible for not being effective at preventing oil and gas and coal companies from extracting and burning and creating carbon emissions. It is still their fault. Just because we haven't convinced them otherwise doesn't mean it's our fault. The cause doesn't transfer to us because we're ineffective. It's still the person doing the fucking crime that is responsible for the crime. And yes, damaging the climate of the planet is a crime.
Whatever oppressed group they're supposed to protect has no agency. In their view, the only way ethnic minorities, women, gay people, etc. can be helped is by concessions from the broader society. In real terms, telling people that they're helpless is the worst thing possible. Even groups under horrifically oppressive conditions like the Jews, Asian Americans, or women in strongly patriarchal societies have been able to find ways to thrive in certain forms. I'm not blaming the oppressed for not doing more, but fatalism is the worst thing possible and not even true. In fact, social justice treats having initiative as morally wrong. I remember when J.D. Vance released his book Hillbilly Elegy about how he pulled himself out of poverty in Appalachia. It was widely hated since it was supposedly giving poor Americans false hope. There are so many think pieces about how heroic stories, whether Batman, Hercules, or the like, are oppressive since it encourages people to act and take initiative.
I'm sorry. I'm going to cherry pick Batman, and maybe that's not fair. Although technically Hercules could be a cherry pick as well. What does Hercules and Batman have in common? They have access to power that most people don't have access to. So yes, their story as heroes is not exactly a story that most people can aspire to. I can't aspire to be a demigod that manages to wear the hide of some fucking lion of... What the fuck is the lion called? Like, I'm not going to do the 12 tasks of Hercules in ascent to godhood, only to be killed by poison or whatever the fuck happens to Hercules at the end. Like, that means nothing to me. Likewise, I'm not a billionaire who can then put on a fucking bat suit when my parents get killed and use that to deal with the ills in society. No. I need to live more realistically. I need to understand that I need to change the way society operates by trying to influence people to vote for people to be in power that are less destructive than the people in power now. That's the point of social justice, is that no, one person can't make this change. We all need to make, or at least a large portion of us need to make the change for it to be effective. We can't be single individuals. And I will make a bold claim that a book called Hillbilly Eulogy is going to be about someone who had access to tools, space, and, a bit of know-how, a bit of hillbilly genius to put together and to create opportunities that you're not necessarily going to find if you're living in a poor neighborhood in a city. And so, yes, it wouldn't necessarily be a super fantastic roadmap for other people to follow in terms of helping themselves help themselves.
I made a video here about how envy influences the social justice movement, and I can really see that, especially in this part of it.
To take something from that video, as social media distorts our view of reality, it makes envy more powerful. People see people more attractive than them and those that are doing better in general. And if you look at who social justice attacks, whether the wealthy white men, and especially with cancel culture, canceling celebrities or successful ancestors.
What cancellation has occurred recently? Joe Rogan wasn't cancelled. Jordan Peterson hasn't been cancelled. Ben Shapiro hasn't been cancelled. Like, if you want to talk about cancel culture, I think the most effective and most common cancellations come from the right. They don't come from the left. Because if you cancel someone from the left, as someone on the left, if we cancelled Joe Rogan, right, it would be he loses his Spotify deal. And he would immediately have access to his same platform because he already had his platform before Spotify. He would then become a martyr and he would appear on shows all across the Western world decrying the ills of cancel culture. Fuck, we saw it. We saw cancel culture with Dave Chappelle. He got cancelled for his Netflix special. It's still on fucking Netflix. He got to go on to massive platforms to talk about how he got cancelled and how toxic cancel culture is. He got to spread his opinion endlessly after that. He never got cancelled, and yet he went on the fucking rounds complaining about how cancel culture is bad. Churchill probably was a racist based on what he lived.
That we could possibly be envious against, then you can clearly see that the movement is driven in large part by envy.
Similarly, that no change is possible in the past, but all the change in the world is possible in the future.
Yeah, I'm envious of what fucking rich people get to do with their lives because they've got the capability to, spend their lives with a lot more autonomy and a lot more choice over how they spend their lives, where they spend their lives, and what they do with their lives. I'm not afraid to say that I'm envious of that. And I think we all deserve a bit more of that. And I think that we could actually more equitably spread the fruits of our collective labor to provide those opportunities more broadly to society. So what's wrong with that? What's wrong with wanting what other people have when there's plenty to go around?
Africana departments like to say racism is as bad today as the 1960s, yet segregation is gone, America's had a black president, and an extremely disproportionate number of American cultural figures are black. However, these departments act as if any changes are possible in the future, totally remaking society through social engineering.
The fun thing about cultural figures having black representation is that it doesn't cost people anything to support cultural figures. Like, I know, yeah, you buy their DVDs or their music CDs or whatever, you go to their concerts and stuff like that. There are monetary factors to it, but someone can be culturally relevant because there's a group of people that relate to that person. And so because, people that are not cis white men exist, then yeah, it is easy for them to be culturally relevant, but not necessarily have power in terms of political power.
Finally, you can totally see the self-serving and irrational nature of social justice through how it treats the rest of the world. Feminist activists in America never talk about the worst treated women in the world, namely in the Islamic world in Africa. At the same time, social justice ignores horrible humanitarian crises around the world, like the genocide of the Rohingya in Myanmar, just only focusing upon the Western world. I mean, there are more slaves in the world now than there were in 1800, and a lot of the...
I don't see a lot of conservative people coming up on their platforms and discussing the plight of people in developing countries. I almost only ever see that when people are trying to disenfranchise people in the West from advocating for better conditions in the West because they point at other places and say, well, you're not as bad as them, so we good?
Them go in supply chains to make the stuff that we use, and you never hear supposed anti-slavery advocates talk about them.
You fucking do. I'm sorry, are you telling me that you don't think we ever hear people boycotting fucking slave labor or companies that are found to have participated in unethical business practices in developing countries? We fucking do. Do they work? No. Are people consistent? No. But you hear about it all the fucking time about sweatshops and shit.
And you never hear supposed anti-slavery advocates talk about them.
And finally, they all ignore class, which I think is a tragedy.
Was that a hidden slide?
Slavery advocates talk about them.
And finally, they...
Oh, it was the old slide.
I'll ignore class, which I think is a tragedy since class is a legitimately big problem in our modern society. This is the era...
He's tried to make the claim that it's based on Marxism, and yet he's now claiming that the left ignores class. There is a portion of the left, and it's a portion of the left that I broadly exist in, that believes that, struggles of gender and race and sexual orientation do broadly correlate to class struggles. And the reason they correlate to class struggles is because the classes that occupy seats of power are bigoted against those groups that do find themselves oppressed. So yeah, we class struggle. Yeah, sorry, mate.
Of the least meritocracy in American history, the highest
God, he's just gish galloping.
This is the era of the least meritocracy in American history. The highest inequality, as an example, 60% of the students in the top 20 American universities are from the 1% of wealthiest families. Social...
That's what the left says. Yeah.
Justice does lip service to class, but they treat all white people, even the ones who grew up in grinding poverty, of which there's a big number, as upper class.
No, they don't. None
of social justice's policies target the many...
Find me a social justice policy that's there to influence positive change in neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color, that excludes white people that are in those same circumstances. You won't find it.
Any problems the lower class face, or do real world policies that would help the lower classes. In fact, they end up opposing policies that help the working classes, like shutting down immigration and constructing tariffs.
Immigration leads to higher GDP. Immigration provides more job opportunities as a whole because there's more people also consuming in those communities. Immigration also adds to the texture of places where you live. immigration is good for the economy. Like honest to God, it is good for the economy. Like it's like people think that people that immigrate to countries just go and they just consume, as if they don't then also consume. Oh, sorry, they just go and they take the jobs that they don't also consume and then create, you know, a wider. It's like saying, what about kids? If people keep having kids, they're going to start taking all those low-paying jobs. Then what's left for actual Americans that have been here since the 80s? These 90s kids are going to take all our jobs. No, that doesn't happen. The population grows, and so demand grows, and so jobs grow with that demand. And, you know... The tuition rates continue to skyrocket. For school.
The greatest irony that they ignored the largest injustice of our times, and I don't think it's a coincidence in that this movement's concentrated among the college-educated upper and middle classes. The question that we face at this point is that if social justice clearly makes no sense, you've got to remember this is a movement with some of the smartest people in the country in it. Why are people incentivized to believe in it? What in our society makes us liable to this mass delusion? Before World War I, for better or for worse, the West was powered off a combination of Christianity, capitalism, nationalism, white supremacy, and science. However, the world wars were so traumatic that the West is still in a massive hangover and a horrifying reality. World War I was an evil and terrible war, fought between nations that were pretty similar and highly developed. But
is this going to be hard times make strong men make easy times make weak men make hard times? Is this what we're going to go down
even
to?
After centuries of progress, barbarity lay beneath the facade of civilization. This was further reinforced when the Germans, supposedly one of the most civilized nations in the world, committed one of the worst atrocities of all time in World War II. Even the good guys in the war, the Americans, killed millions of people while using the most horrifying weapon of all time. This meant that the West is going through a crisis of confidence that we're currently living through. If the West could still perpetuate all these horrifying barbarisms in the world wars, how could it claim any moral superiority, and how could it claim its progress had any meaning?
Sorry, I've seen enough people online from America talk about World War II who think that, hoorah, America, fuck yeah. Like, I don't think they have a lot of shame or... I'm talking about, like, not all Americans, obviously, but they're, you know, particularly the side of politics this person is talking from. I think you're more likely to find people that'll be like, fuck yeah, nuke, than people that hung over from the moral quandary of whether or not it was ethical to nuke civilian cities.
Could it claim any moral superiority, and how could it claim its progress had any meaning? Although capitalism, science, and Christianity resulted in countless real-world advances and progresses, since they were used...
Christianity, yeah, sure.
To justify the horrors that were the world wars, they were treated as if they were fundamentally evil. When you look at the group that really got with social justice and made it popular, it was the baby boomers, or the children of the World War II generation that largely tried to react against everything their parents stood for.
You can easily predict social justice philosophy based off what's the opposite of the Nazis, where the Nazis were racist against non-whites, nationalistic, militaristic, and misogynistic. Meanwhile, social justice is the opposite, or racist against white people, says the nation is evil, is toxically pacifist, and says gender doesn't exist. But
toxically passive?
The Nazis were so evil that people wanted to do the opposite afterwards, but truth be told, you can't just have two dots in your moral framework, and trying to do the opposite of anything to a ludicrous degree just brings out another evil.
The social justice philosophy gradually got put in place and reached its climax as boomers were in power for longer and longer, and were thus able to...
My God, I love the contention that boomers are the source of the social justice culture that we live in today. Not hating on boomers, but like I think we would all agree that successive generations have become more progressive over time and more tolerant, and have had an easier time in accepting diversity in their circles. So to hang this on the shoulders of boomers because they are now currently the ones that are the professors in education, that is such a weird premise. The great irony is that the boomers are now mocked for not being social justice enough. Oh, that's exactly what I just said. I didn't even read that. This is like that Bill Maher video recently where he was like, I haven't changed, but the left's changed. Like, no shit. Yes, we get more progressive over time. Are you shocked? Did you think that being progressive was a static thing, that you'd achieve it in your 30s, and then when you're fucking 50, you would expect that the whole world would have stopped with you? No. We don't do that. We're always expanding. We want to welcome more and more people into our social bubble of who we consider to be important, valid, and welcome. We don't want to stop because we're going to miss out on people if we stop.
Enact their worldviews. In short terms, the world wars were so traumatic that it resulted in the West trying to commit suicide, which is social justice. Saying that social justice is a suicidal impulse will be controversial, but it really shouldn't be.
He said he was going to be rational. He said he was going to be common sense, and now he's saying the West tried to commit suicide. I try to make that very clear. I was promised a rational video based on his study, his academic acumen, and his knowledge of history, philosophy, and religion. And we are currently at the point where the West tried to commit suicide with social justice.
SJWs literally say that Western civilization, whiteness, are evil hierarchies that have to be ripped apart. They say whiteness is evil and try to increase diversity as a moral good, as if decreasing the Western or whiteness of an organization would make it better.
So whiteness without diversity is less innovative and less likely to progress society than a diverse society. So if a country is based upon its whiteness, then yes, it needs to be torn apart. If a country is based upon its diversity and its myriad of people that make up citizens, because I don't think we could point to any country really that would accurately be described as a white country. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say, as opposed to, whiteness is fine. Because whiteness is literally saying whiteness is excluding non-white people. And what country exists without non-white people?
They openly hate and try to destroy all the pillars of Western society, whether or not they're positive such as
white supremacists. Oh, God. So, what are we destroying today? White supremacists? Yes, we're destroying white supremacists. White voyeurism wouldn't challenge a white supremacist, desires non-whiteness because it's interesting, pleasurable, seeks control of the consumption and appropriation of non-whiteness. All right, so white voyeurism. I like other cultures because they're weird and it's like looking at animals. Yeah, we can get rid of that. White privilege. May critique supremacy, but deep investment in questions of fairness, equality under normalization of whiteness and the white rule, sworn goal of diversity. Yep, that's fine. We'll get rid of that too. White benefit, sympathetic to a set of issues, but only privately. Won't speak, act in solid. Yep, get rid of them. If you don't speak or act publicly about a desire for diversity, then I think you can pop in the bin. White confessional, some exposure of whiteness takes place, but in a way that as a way of being accountable to PSC. So you're a poser, right? That's fine. White critical, take on board critiques of whiteness and invest in exposing, marking the white regime, refuses to be complicit with the white regime, whiteness, speaking back to whiteness. White traitor, actively refuses complicity. White abolitionist, changing institutions, dismantling whiteness, and not allowing whiteness to reassert itself. I'd be interested to know more about that in context.
Like speech and Christianity. They go even further, wanting to deconstruct any stabilizing force in society, whether the family, relations between the sexes, loyalty to higher authority, or property right.
Boy, the great irony is that family and property rights help the poor the most. They don't. Property rights absolutely do not help the poor the most. You know what would have helped me the most when I didn't have a lot of money? It would have been socialized property markets where, it's recognized that it actually doesn't matter if you're poor or rich. We're all fucking paying like a weekly amount of money that equates to a mortgage repayment. I was lucky enough to buy a house in 2020. And when I bought the house, like I'm 38 this year, so I'm no spring chicken. And I worked out that the amount of rent I've paid since I moved out of home when I was 17 would have paid off a mortgage a couple of years ago. And the only reason that I didn't have access to purchase a property when I moved out of my home is because of the property markets and property rights and the idea of risks so it is too risky for a bank to give a loan to someone when they are just starting out in life. So there is a market for people to rent property, which means that there is profit to be made by people capitalizing property to then rent to people. So then there is a greater level of competition for property, which drives up the price, which means that people then can't get into the market, which means that there's a bigger market now for people to purchase property to capitalize as rentals, as investments that then grow. And property prices never go down. They go down in years, they go up in decades. So like if you start buying property in your 20s and 30s, when you retire at 50, 60, you'll have millions of dollars. It's ridiculous. It is horrific. And all of that is at the expense of poor people. So if you want to tell me that family and property, particularly property rights help the poor? That is bullshit. The poor are destroyed. 30, 40, 50% of poor people's income pays off another person's asset, is paying for the wealth of another person, of their landlord's fucking investment portfolio. That is going into their fucking pocket, and that landlord is providing zero value. If there were government systems that actually assisted people to get into housing and made sure that they had access to loans, and that, like, I was able to, at 17, commit to tens of thousands of dollars in student loans to the government through a program, because they understood that if you get an education, you get more money and you start paying more taxes, and there's a benefit for that. There's also a benefit to actually having stable housing, and if you have stable housing, you're more likely to stay in work, you're more likely to be able to have more productive work, get paid more, pay more taxes, and yet we do nothing to support that. We do nothing to protect that. We do nothing to ensure that everyone has the option to purchase a house, a fucking place to live. And instead, we continually end up with fucking governments that incentivize investment properties, rental properties, cheap fucking developments of these horrible houses that are all just stamped with slight variations as cities spread further and further apart, making public transport less reliable, less likely, cars more of a necessity, driving further and longer to get to places of work. It is horrific. Now, I recognize that they are probably not just talking about literally property. They are probably talking about, hey, don't steal my pair of shoes. But I want to make it very clear that poor people are not necessarily, there's no irony in property rights helping the poor the most, because I don't believe that's actually the case. I think property rights, which essentially, particularly under Marxist theory, the most predominant property right is the right of people who own capital, business owners, factory owners and stuff, to use that to exploit value out of poor people. So yeah, no, the irony is actually that poor people are harmed the most by property rights, because capitalists in a capitalist society are able to use property rights to extract wealth out of poor people and funnel it to themselves. And you know what? There's a funny thing about that is that we have literal data showing that there is a higher and higher concentration over time of wealth funneling itself into a smaller and smaller proportion of the entire country, whether it's America, Australia, Britain, Canada, I don't care. We see that the capitalization of property and ideas and businesses to the point where they are getting gobbled up by these mega corporations is certainly not helping the poor people. Look at fucking Amazon workers. How good is that going for them?
The relativism and unthinking hatred of the West and social justice is disgusting.
This is literally the movement where feminists are allied with Islamic radicals due to their shared hatred of the West.
Likewise, the moral relativism in which any criticism of foreign society
I love how he added that in post.
is matched by the often ludicrous comparison to the West.
Yeah, Joe, the public transport, I love public transport, right? I think public transport is a fantastic thing, and part of that is I can't drive because of my eyesight. I can't get a license. At the very most, I might be able to get a license that I would only be able to use on local roads, only in the daylight. And you know what? I'm not paying for a car and all the associated costs of having a car if I can only use it for very minute things. So that has put me in a position in life where I rely exclusively on public transport. It means that I can't really consider seriously living in a city that is not large enough to have a robust transport network. I live in Brisbane in Australia. So while that's a capital of my state, its public transport network is basically a cross in terms of the rail network that goes from north to south. And there's sort of 2-3 major lines that run north and south, and they sort of are like spokes on a bicycle wheel. I have to live next to one of those train lines, and I'm heavily incentivized to live close to the center of the spokes where there's more trains, because the different train lines converge. And as a result of that, you know, I purchased a house. I purchased a apartment building for the same price as a house, because I can't afford a house in the area I need to live to have access to public transport to then be able to, you know, have access to my place of work. That's a tangent rant, actually. That's not really related to this video, but yeah. what is this obsession with comparing poor Americans to poor people in Africa? There is a bigger difference between the poor in America and the rich in America than there is between the poor in America and the poor in Africa. That's the difference we care about. This is bad. This is worse. But these two things are astronomically closer to each other than any of these are to the richest people in America.
Africa is corrupt and China's authoritarian, but so is America, they'd say, not realizing how wrong they are. The fact that people are actively breaking the law and often going on horrifying journeys to reach Western countries, while the reverse never happens, suggests that the West is doing pretty well as of now. This meme does a better job of breaking down social justice's suicidal impulse than anything I could say. This shows how every single action a white person could do is racist. The only thing a white person could possibly do to not sin is to support their cause and give them more power. The social justice movement has been so successful since in the vacuum of belief that came after the world wars crushed our previous moral pillars, social justice was simply just loud and there was no moral push back to work against them. Thus, those with scruples push aside those without in the disorganized opposition. Similarly, every vehicle of cultural output like education and media, or the people who could formulate arguments against social justice were heavily leftist. At the same time, social justice plays to genuinely worthwhile causes that the average decent person of a Western country would support. Your average modern person doesn't support oppression of gay people or ethnic minorities. I mean, I feel this. One of my best friends is a climate change advocate, and another is an ex-Black Panther who's an advocate for police reform. And many police departments around America do need serious restructuring, and we should be dealing with climate change, but social justice pushes for these worthwhile causes that one would look like a monster to stand against in the worst ways possible. The social justice movement likes to say that if they had more authority, they'd be able to fix the systemic problems, but from looking at real-world evidence, that's...
None of them are left-wingers. I don't know these states, but none of them are left-wingers. They are not left-wing. They are not... Conservative Challenge 2022. Remember that the Democratic elected officials are not on the left.
Clearly not the case. There are plenty of areas that have been under the control of social justice ideologues and have been for a while. However, as a good example, look at the American West Coast, which has incredibly high inequality, still has a good deal of racial segregation, what amounts to regressive and classist policies like extremely strict housing laws which hurt the lower classes, as well as being so negative for businesses as to weaken their economies, and crippling problems like homelessness and drug use.
I mean, as an example, look at the city of Los Angeles, which effectively stopped enforcing the rule of law, and so mass robberies occurred in this train area, effectively turning it into a hellscape.
It's not a coincidence people are leaving from blue states going to red ones at a really fast rate right now. 20 years ago, the West Coast was extremely creative, pleasant, and prosperous.
Yeah, I thought it was weird he had Greta up on screen. I suppose he just doesn't want to dox their friend.
So much so that it became the center of the future tech revolution. However, as left-wing ideologues seized control of these states, it precipitated their decline. Alternatively, look at Canada, where as radical leftists gain more and more power, they've pushed for authoritarian policies as leftists do every time. Which takes us to the main point. The social justice movements are predicted by what will give the college educated...
I don't think Justin Trudeau is a leftist, right?
and more work. There's a brilliant historian named Peter Turchin who created a computer model that's been able to predict when societies divide and fall into civil wars across history. The driving factors are wage stagnation with rising cost of living and inequality, which means there's more competition and desperation for fewer good jobs. This pressure means that societies are split among different factions that want more jobs and influence people like them. Examples of this across history include the English Civil War, the fall of the Roman Republic, the Russian Revolution, and I could name like 20 more. However, it's exactly what's happening in the modern world today. In modern America, the divide between the college-educated left and the right, who is a coalition of non-college-educated groups like the military, church, and businessmen. You can predict social justice's actions based off
military, church, and businessmen.
What gives college degrees more money and influence? Defund the police is giving influence to college-educated social workers over the police. The diplomacy emphasis is giving it to college-educated diplomats over the military.
So he understands that defund the police is trying to advocate for more social programs and social workers to intervene in areas that are more appropriate for people trained in social work than people trained in police work, right? So he understands that. He neglected that when he talked about defund the police earlier in the video.
Regulation of businesses giving college-educated bureaucrats power over capitalists, and social justice theory is college professors having moral authority over traditional religion. From what we've seen so far in looking at their actions, social justice isn't driven primarily by agenda.
Oh, wait. There's a swear here. One of the things that pisses me off that people never understand is that people's real characters are shown by their actions, not the words they say to justify them. If a man tells you he wants to fix your sink but steals your TV, he's really a thief. Somehow the left always gets to get away with failed projects and with destroying countries by saying their intentions were good. Look, the intentions of the Spanish Inquisition and the witch trials were good, so why weren't they... the intentions of the Spanish Inquisition and the witch trials were not good. They were not good intentions. They were bad intentions. So why don't they somehow get a pass? The left often fails because of the right pushing back. Like, The left isn't failing projects because they suck. They're failing projects because they lack the political and social power to enact change, because they are in contrast, in contention with the right. They are vying for power. They're not operating in a vacuum and failing. They're operating in a state of tension with opposing ideas, and the right is incredibly well-funded and has a, sad to say, a very large block of people that are passionate about being conservatives. So it's not that they get away with failed projects, it's that we haven't won. We've lost. We're winning because we're making slow progress over time. But it's interesting that, he conceded at the very start the civil rights and the gay rights movements as not being social justice, but being effective and being good. And yet he's drawn a line arbitrarily at the point where he's satisfied with these are the things I like, and now everything else I hate. And so by taking out what worked and what we succeeded at, he now wants to complain that we're getting away with doing nothing but failing. Ridiculous.
Desire to help the downtrodden, since their policies have been universally ineffective, but keep on being pushed for without question, since it's inside the self-interest of the college-educated classes. Social justice merely uses concern for oppressed groups as a way of creating policies that are good for them.
Christianity's shadow
has been the framework of Western civilization for the better part of 2,000 years.
We're almost there.
Most of your ideas on how the world works comes from Christianity, even with modern atheism making no sense without a Christian framework. As Christianity when social justice largely took its place among the college-educated technocrat class mentioned before.
In Christianity, Satan takes on the outward appearance of good, while in substance being the exact opposite.
This is the perfect description of social justice, which takes the main assumption of Christianity, that scapegoating others and treating them unfairly for things outside their control, as represented in the crucifixion, is evil, and pushes the veneer of that, well, in reality going for the opposite. The famous Swiss psychologist Carl Jung had a term called the shadow. The mask is the part of your personality that you want to show the world, while the shadow is what you hide and comes out when you're not in your zone or are a poorly integrated person. Social justice is a representation of the toxic elements in Christianity parading under Christian virtues. An example of this is cancel culture. Across history, scapegoating is a holy right in which a group will...
I still think the right is better at cancelling than the left.
Scapegoat a violator of group norms and muster together around the shared sin of killing this person as a way of bringing the community together. The crucifixion was meant to show that that was wrong, and one's connection with morality and God was what was important rather than group politics. Social justice is the exact opposite, and it's driven by group mores in which not being able to keep up with the slightest new verdict about what words are appropriate or not will result in excommunication.
It's a McCarthyism that tries to destroy dissidents' lives to supposedly save the community.
Social justice is powered by...
McCarthyism. Fucking hell. I don't think anyone's getting thrown in jail for using slurs.
Canceling those who violate it, thus making the cancelers feel virtuous that they're more moral. However, since canceling is how one shows moral virtue, it creates a repetitive cycle of more and more insanity and cruelty.
This is such a shit take, right? So here's a position I think that's cohesive when it comes to cancel culture. The predominant amount of cancellations that you see people cry about online are generally boiled down to soft mechanisms for society to reject bad ideas or bad actors. So when people do say or behave in a way that conflicts with what society considers to be polite or conductive good behavior, then that person gets ostracized. The ostracization of people from groups has happened forever. As a social species, that's actually part of the mechanics that helps us create social bonds. The idea that we ensure that as a social group, we behave in ways that benefits broadly the group at hand. When people want to complain about the left canceling people, we cancel people when they do things like saying, trans men aren't men, or that being gay is a sin, or that black people are just more criminal, or, hey, it's fine if 1% of the population owns 20% of the wealth. I mean, that's not what people get cancelled for, but you know what I mean? Like, when people say and do those things, that hurts the cohesiveness of society because it hurts groups that are part of society. And so we ostracize them. That's a natural, and I think that's a perfectly ethical way to treat those types of behaviors, particularly when you have this type of behavior that is not to the point where it's considered criminal by the justice system, that we do need social soft methods for dealing with bad behaving people. Alex Jones, for example, right? He says that the frogs are being turned gay by the water, so we cancelled him. We decided that as a group of people that operate on the internet, that we didn't want to support him, that we put pressure on places like YouTube to not platform him, and he got cancelled off places like YouTube so that he's relegated to a less effective means of communicating and has a lower impact on, general social cohesion by spouting his conspiratorial bullshit. That is a good thing. To say, well, cancel culture is bad because of free speech, well, I think that free speech is balanced by what people want to hear. And if people don't want to hear your speech, you need to recognize that. You need to go and continue to use your free speech, but over in that corner, because we don't want you in our corner. We go to your own corner. Meanwhile, the right will seek to legislate cancel culture into things like not allowing gender affirming care for children in Texas. So you tell me which cancel culture deserves a little bit more criticism and a little bit more of our time in the cultural milieu that we find ourselves in, because I think you'll find that what we cancel, again, I'm using that term because I want to use the same language they're using. Because I want to, even with the dumb shit way that they want to couch cancellation, I can still say that what they cancel versus what we cancel, it's not even the same fucking ball game. It is a completely different league. And I would defend that just about every day of the fucking week.
As the main moral arm of the movement. This is a process of trying to one-up each other in it.
What did Katy Perry do? I mean, and Katy Perry's not cancelled as far as I know. Taylor Swift's not cancelled. Kevin Hart is still doing. Liam Neeson's fine. Wait, that makes my point. I don't know who Laura Lee is.
Social behavior, which is referred to by the Christian philosopher René Girard as mimetic, and is how social justice is largely driven by crowd psychology. An example of the shadow is that social justice takes at the heart of Christian philosophy, or the desire to help the downtrodden, with a complete lack of moral structure.
I hope he stretched before making this reach, because linking cancel culture to a Christian doctrine is,
Biggest problem with modern ideologies is they believe that the ends justify the means, and thus completely lack a moral structure since everything is justified to reach their
What are these cards he puts in the middle? Because he doesn't read these. No, seriously, social justice never looks at how to be a good neighbor, an honorable boss, or search for the truth. There's no such thing as an honorable boss. Or search for the truth through any lens except the political. This means that if someone is fighting racism, being a dick to their parents, lying about their history, or hyperinflating the currency is acceptable. What? This means that if someone is fighting racism, being a dick to their parents, lying about history. Show me someone lying about history when they're fighting for racism, and we'll chat about that instance.
Social justice has no framework for what being a decent person is, and thus is why the rudest, most intolerant, and cruelest people.
I haven't actually heard much about the Don't Say Gay bill. I think I've heard it referenced, but I haven't seen any content about it directly yet. But that's pretty, Fuck, I love how they've all got these photos saved. It's always the same photo of someone that is obviously being very emphatic about something at the time, and they've got the frame that is the least flattering frame.
Are often social justice warriors, since it's a philosophy that creates a veneer of morality, which justifies the worst possible actions along the way. Social justice overemphasizes caring about if others are harmed at the expense of everything else. It throws out and even disrespects traditional Christian values like the search for the truth, humility, courage, and patience. Values that...
Humility is probably the worst thing Christianity ever taught me. And it's probably still the thing I struggle with the most in overcoming, in that you get taught as part of Christianity that don't be proud of yourself. Pride is a sin. Don't seek the praise of men, because if men praise you for good deeds in this life, then you already have your reward. But what better would it be to get your reward before your Father in heaven? Humility is bullshit. And I'm not saying being arrogant either. The opposite of humility is not arrogance. The opposite of humility is confidence. Arrogance is to not have an appropriate appreciation of your skill. And that's not the opposite of humility. Humility is not taking credit for your skill and for your achievements. God, this is getting complex bringing Christianity into social justice.
That hold any stable and happy society together. As a Stoic Christian, when I talk to a Buddhist, Transcendentalist, Muslim, or most atheists, I know that we share the same core values at heart. That's not the case with social justice, which actively goes against the values of a stable society. From my study of history, I would say social justice is evil for a couple of reasons. The first of which is that it shoots its own dissenters. The slightest difference in opinion will result in excommunication, which allows insane fanaticism and disconnection from reality to
So, here's an interesting point, right? So, the right does lack humility, but I wouldn't criticize them for lacking humility, because I think, like I said, humility is the inverse of confidence, right? So humility is not taking credit for the good things or the skillful attributes that you have. What the right has is arrogance. They have an inflated sense of their ability or of their accomplishments. And so they think that they are able to, or they think that their position is the better position, but they don't have the skill or the foundation to back it up. That's what I think is the issue with the right. However, the position he's just had with the left here, and that dissenting opinions in the left get you torn up, this is the biggest, I think, hurdle to people that do push against conservative and right-wing ideas. And the problem is that people on the right, there can be, so he's mentioned, I think he's mentioned that he's got a gay friend. He would not excise someone from his sphere of influence, or he would not criticize someone on the right for being homophobic. You know, unless they were real NFIB direct forms of homophobia, he would tolerate people that are latently homophobic, or people that are implicitly homophobic. He would tolerate that on the right. And broadly, that's what happens in conservative political blocs, that they will tolerate dissenting opinions amongst themselves because their main concern is for themselves. So they are most worried about, do I get what I want out of this? I don't care if they're doing something that doesn't affect me. So they will tolerate that kind of dissent within their groups. The left won't tolerate so as an individual person on the left is far less likely to tolerate someone diverting from their ethical framework without then 100% sort of seeking to excise that person from, or denying that that person is also on the left. And I see that pretty consistently now. I watch a few content creators. One of them is Vosh, right? Depending on what your follow list looks like on Twitter, you can see a lot of mentions of Vosh, and he is someone that is on the left. I consider him to be on the left. There are people that don't consider him to be on the left, but he's a good example of someone who, because of the way he speaks at times, there are people that say he is not on the left, that he is actually a neo-Nazi, or that he is actually a psyop, or he is a plant from the right to make people on the left look bad. And like, there's a lot of antagonism and people that will splinter off on that. So for example, if you were to go to Reddit, and if you subscribe to, like if you join the Vosh subreddit, you actually automatically get banned from a whole range of subreddits that have people on the left talking about ideas on the left. And like, that's just an example of that sort of fragmentation that happens on the left. Like you might get things like, for example, neo-pronouns, ze, zer, and those types of pronouns, where you might get people on the left where there's some people that will fully embrace that and validate that, and then there are other people on the left that will go, oh, I'm not sure about that. I think that, maybe we need to stick to, what we already have, because that's more understandable. And like, yes, if you're a ze, zer, you still fit into whatever pronoun is traditional. And that will cause a schism. That will actually cause people to break off. And so you get this sort of cascading effect. It kind of splinters in the same way that like Protestant Christianity splintered. So you look at the political parties, you got like the Catholic Church, which is a monolith. That's the right. And then you got the left, which is Protestantism, which has just become everything, including ridiculous, far out, crazy sects like the Mormons and the JWs and stuff, and the Pentecostals. But then you've still got the more down to earth and robust Anglicans and uniting churches and things like that. And that's a challenge for the left, because it means that when we are looking at operating in democratic elections, it's a bit more difficult to find that voting bloc working in its interest as an aggregate. Whereas on the right, I mean, they rallied behind fucking Donald Trump. Like, even the Christian conservatives voted for fucking Donald Trump, a man of obvious sin if you're looking at it from a conservative Christian point of view in terms of the way he womanizes and the way he fetishizes young women. Yet they looked straight past that to see someone that wanted to project strong nationalistic conservative values in other areas of the political discussion. Whereas on the left, you had people who were Bernie or bust, and you know what? I get it. Bernie would have been the better option in terms of president out of everyone that was in the most recent presidential campaign, by a long shot from what I've seen. And then yet there were people in America who, when Bernie didn't get the nomination, they abdicated any opportunity to vote past that. And as an Australian, where we are required to vote by law, which I think is fair in a democratic society. I think if you're operating in a democratic country, that you actually have a responsibility to vote. It's not a right, it's a responsibility to vote. It's also a position of privilege because I get the opportunity, for example, I can vote for the Greens Party, which is probably the strongest party on climate change, but I know that the Greens might not get in. Bernie Sanders might not get in, but I know that vote will flow on to the next most palatable option for me, which will be the Labour Party in the upcoming election. And I know America doesn't have that safety net in terms of still being able to vote your conscience, but vote effectively or strategically. So I think without that safety net, there's still like the fact that the left wouldn't vote strategically in that circumstance is part of why the left is ineffective, particularly in America. And unfortunately, again, America dictates the cultural discussions that happen in every other country in the West. So while you guys are still trying to get your legs sorted out and underneath you when it comes to being, effective as progressives in America, it's slowing the rest of us down. So please get that shit sorted. It'd be much appreciated. I know that's a very selfish ask.
Develop. Secondly, they have no moral compass, which is evident in that their supporters will burn cities, make policies that don't work, and ruin people's careers over minor statements, but you never see the movement hold its own members accountable. Literal rebellions are described as peaceful protests.
He literally just said that the left tears itself apart and has no issue with cancelling itself, and followed it with the claim that if someone on the left says something wrong, they're never held accountable. This guy has fucking brainworms. Like, did he not record those lines consecutively? Did he record one in 1 week, forget it, record the other one, and then mash them together in editing without listening to what he was putting together? Also, the BLM protests were unbelievably peaceful statistically because of the broad amount of those protests. There was violence that did break out because that's what happens at protests, because emotions are very high and people operating in groups have a very different mental state in terms of how they respond to things. And let's not even get into the forceful response by police in many of those cases who escalated violence. But statistically, you can't sit there and say the left has violent protests, and particularly when we have the January 6th riots.
You'll never see a person in the social justice movement say their movement did something wrong, except not being radical enough.
Christian philosophy refers to Satan as the Lord of Lies. This is since, as the search for the truth is muddied, it means humans have no guiding principles and automatically degrade back to base, disgusting norms.
Okay, Satan is actually Lucifer, the Lord of Light. He was the highest of the three archangels, and he is basically, oh God, why is he getting into Christianity?
The truth is gone and the malicious can spread lies that benefit them more easily.
This is effectively social justice's strategy of saying objective truth doesn't exist, so you can only believe in their truth, which means they control reality. This is why they try to break down every barrier and scream at you when you disagree. A great example of this is a group of professors once sent a series of...
I'm not screaming at you, my friend. I'm going through this very rationally, very calmly, and you've spoken in claims, you've not spoken in examples. The few examples you've brought up have been incorrect, poorly presented, or have not had enough data. So,
fraudulent studies of social justice journals that were purposely ridiculous, like saying white people should ceremonially wear chains to atone for slavery, or copy and pasting Mein Kampf but replacing Jews with various oppressive groups, and they had all of them published in real journals. They actually won an award for a paper about how dogs humping in the park is a sign of rape culture. As I've said before, this movement has no morality and only cares.
I bet there's context to that. And even if there's no context to that and there was something ridiculous that happened that got published, exceptions don't make the rules.
There's a power. Now, this is the billion-dollar question. How worried should we be about social justice getting worse or seizing more power? Well, this is my answer. I don't think social justice will exist in 20 years. It's becoming so radical and disliked at such a fast speed, and it's so untethered from general public opinion that there's no way it doesn't burn out and discredit itself. Estimates put the social justice cadre at between 6 to 20% of American population, and we're definitely already seeing a backlash. My worry, however, is that the backlash will be something even worse than social justice. If an entire generation of young men grow up listening to insane feminism, the next generation of leadership might push too far in the other direction and become deeply misogynistic, for example. Industrialized populations, when pushed too far, tend to go to right-wing authoritarianism. Much of social justice is nasty, but it's too disconnected from reality to be really dangerous, which is not the case for the authoritarian right. It's our responsibility to make sure whatever backlash happens to social justice remains honorable and keeps the downtrodden from being heard. The problem is that social justice will continue to get more radical, as it has been doing it faster and faster.
I'm sorry. He just said that he's worried that if the left is too radical, the right will get too authoritarian. Like, isn't that a self-own? Like, that's an own goal.
Speeds, largely because their whole moral compass is built off showing themselves to be morally superior. I'm not sure where they'll go next. I'm already surprised at how far they've gotten now, to be honest. Similarly, if the recession that me and a lot of other people think are predicting will come, it will further worsen standards of living.
The depression that me and a lot of people will come. I didn't know he was a fucking economist too.
Will make social justice even worse. In summary, expect this movement to get worse until it inevitably burns out due to its own ridiculousness, and then people will scramble to hide that they had ever had their pronouns in their social media. However, a big question is how many necessary traditions social justice will eat before it dies. Like communism, social justice never builds anything effective, but tries to rip apart social cohesion for more power.
Social justice doesn't even have a theory of constructing everything, with their entire worldview built upon taking from pre-existing successful organisms. Another very important thing to consider is that for a civilization to die, only the elite needs to be wiped out or become complicit in the civilization's death. And a major problem here is that these ideologues control the groups and systems that create much of our leadership class, or the top universities.
The way you deal with social justice is to not surrender.
They really overestimate how much power universities have compared to like the political class and the business class. Particularly the business class. Like, are the biggest ideologues in America academics or businessmen? Like, I'm pretty sure Bezos and Elon Musk are far more influential and far more important to the zeitgeist of American capitalism than like academics. The only academic I can think of off the top of my head is Jordan Peterson, and he barely counts. Like, it's a fantasy. It is a fantasy to think that because educational institutions are progressive and are more progressive, that they are the ones that are creating elites for the future. Like, just because the professors are progressive doesn't mean the students come out progressive.
Cowardness. They will merely install more ideologues if given the ability to do so, and will immediately push for more concessions. If you run a company, don't let diversity coordinators show up, since they don't have an incentive to solve racial problems.
What do you mean, don't let them show up? They get hired by the fucking CEOs to literally virtue signal to their customers that you should buy from their company because they do diversity training. Diversity training in companies is literally a fucking product to whitewash, for want of a better word, companies into appearing more diverse and more accommodating than they actually are, because you wouldn't need diversity training if your company was diverse. That's oversimplification, but you understand my point there.
Which would end their job, only to effectively become commissars for their ideology in your organization. The way to fight social justice is to stand for good values. Stand behind things an 11-year-old could realize were true, like common human politeness.
I love every time a conservative person claims that what a child can understand is a measure for a high level of competency in navigating complex societal questions like diversity, inclusion, representation, and social justice. Like, if an 11-year-old can't understand it, then that idea is crazy. Like, that's their bar. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, we started this video with this guy's qualifications being spouted out about how much he was academically oriented and like reading the sources, doing the classes, coming at this from both sides. Let's not forget that this video is a result of him coming at this project from both sides, and yet not once has he represented a leftist ideal or a leftist desire for change accurately. He's criticized the straw man that he's put up on it, but he's never actually criticized it accurately. We look at the pay gap idea, where he tried to dismiss the pay gap idea because if you control for everything down to this person in this job in this company in this time, they get paid the same, and didn't look at the social factors that actually influence what people earn over their lives, which is what people are actually concerned about. We're actually concerned about the outcomes of people's lives, not a snapshot at a point in time where you can normalize everything away to appear equal. Crazy.
Truth and honor. Like some horrifying Star Trek monster, social justice only gains power from our fear of it.
Otherwise, as we've seen with Chaz, it's just a movement run by people who can't...
We're not powered by your fear. We're powered by your stupidity, by your callousness, by your rejection of pretty open facts. That's what powers me, not your fear. I don't care if you... Look, let's be honest. Most conservatives aren't afraid of me. Actually, maybe I'll take that back. It is difficult to find a conservative to actually talk about these ideas because they don't like talking about these ideas face to face. They're very good at putting out their ideas. They tend to be very bad at discussing their ideas. We can look at some of the most prominent right-wing, what's the word for thinkers, but someone that's a conservative? Pundits. Some of the most... so the biggest right-wing pundits, Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder, when they want to talk to someone that has a different point of view to them, where do they go? They go to literal fucking children. They go to universities. They go to freshmen. They wander around. Steven Crowder will set up a fucking table with his folder full of research that he's been working on for a week, and then he will try and get people to debunk his vetted statements, his vetted facts that he has constructed and cherry-picked to suit his idea, and he'll expect randoms off the street who just woke up this morning and went to get a fucking Starbucks and expect them to be able to debunk his bad research with no research, which is a ridiculous proposition to make. That is the level of your best. That is the best that the right has. Whereas I see people on the left every day on Twitch, on YouTube, and out there actually doing things in my city that would just destroy any conservative that bothered to come up to them and to challenge them on things like climate change, to challenge them on why this is Indigenous land, that why I am standing on Turrbal land, not Australian land at the moment, why the pay gap is important to women, why trans identity and affirmating that identity as a society is important, why ensuring that different sexual identities are just as welcome, and that we don't allow our football stars to put out fucking tweets and expect them to not see reprisals for saying that those people are going to hell because of the way that they were born. That's the difference between the left and right.
Organize themselves, can't feed themselves, and aren't very well armed. Whatifalthis, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please like, comment, subscribe, or stay.
That was the end. Oh boy. 12:15. Well done. That was a long one. What was that? 3 hours and 15 minutes to get through a 45-minute video. Who could have guessed that? I could have guessed that. I keep forgetting to set the chat to disappear over time. I don't like how it just stays up there necessarily, so... Fun times. Well, that's all for today, I guess. And that's probably... Yeah, I just saw that video and I had to go through it. There wasn't actually a lot of substance to it. I did honestly think... Shut up. I did honestly think there would be a bit more of an academic lean just because of the way it started, but that was me being overly charitable, I guess. But I'm okay with that. Like I can approach these people with full principle of charity and still find their positions to be lacking, and I think that's a more powerful defense than to nitpick their language and their ideas. Because, you know what, even in the most charitable understanding of what that video was all about. It was bullshit. So, oh boy, man, that other website that he was talking about to get to 1,000. What is it? Pearl. I'm curious. I'm very curious. Anyway, I'm gonna go. I'm tired. It's after midnight. That was fun. I enjoyed that. Thank you to everyone who came, and thank you to everyone that watched in the future. I can't remember if my lives go straight to a playlist or if they still go to my video section. My intent is that they go to a playlist, and yeah, this might not be an easy one to edit into a single video, so we'll see how that goes. I'll check my Twitter DMs now. There's a bit of delay, so by the time you respond to that, then you might I might be gone. But thank you for hanging out, Joe, and thank you for looking after the moderation for our friend who joined us for a little while. It was fun. It was good. I feel like I did something with my evening, and that's the least. I got rid of all that pent-up nostalgic energy for going out to the nightclubs and dancing and drinking and stuff, so that's always something. So I need to go and hydrate there, though, before I go to sleep so I don't have a hangover tomorrow. Even though I only had 2 drinks, and I still feel like I've got to hydrate. I mean, that's just being a responsible person, right? How many standard drinks is in this? Only 1. Okay, that's good. Cool. Anyway, I'll check my DMs, and I'll catch you later.